What day is it? It's day 20 of Kabbalah and Coffee and like Pimp Kabbalah Chronicles, whatever you want to consider it, the Kabbalah Crash Course. Um, what are we doing? What are we learning today? Well, I kind of wanted to. It's like we're solving issues. I feel whether anybody listens to this, that's another story. I wonder if Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was like, I'm gonna have Igros Moshe published or whatever, and I wonder if this will solve shit. I think he figured it would, and I kind of think that this will too. All right, so what are we learning? We've got to learn something about Kabbalah. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how long this thing's gonna go. Red string Kabbalah. We'll learn about this shit.
Wearing a thin scarlet or a crimson string, Hebrew, Kahashmi, as a type of talisman is a Jewish folk custom which is practiced as a way to ward off misfortune which is brought about by the evil eye. Hebrew, the tradition is popularly thought to be associated with Kabbalah and religious forms of Judaism. The red string itself is usually made from thin scarlet wool thread. It is worn as a bracelet or band on the wrist of the wearer. The red string was worn in many cultures and not found it solely in Jewish culture. Hinduism and Chinese culture has also worn this red string or bracelet for luck, love and to ward off evil. Biblical history. A scarlet thread, tied about the wrist, is mentioned in Genesis 38. Tamar becomes pregnant by her father-in-law, Judah, and gives birth to twin boys. The following verses about this event are taken from the King James Bible. Genesis, chapter 38, 27. And it came to pass in the time of her travail, that, behold, twins were in her womb. 28. And it came to pass, when she travailed, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This came out first. 29. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that, behold, his brother came out, and she said, How hast thou broken forth this breach be upon thee? Therefore his name was called Phares. 30. And afterward came out his brother, that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Sarah. As early as Rabbi Shmuel ben Gafni Gaon, Jewish commentators noted that the placement of a red string on one's hand may be a good omen. Some sources imply it may even be placed around a finger. Some early Jewish commentators, such as Agathis Bereshis, write that Joseph's coat, given to him by Jacob, was actually the exact same as the coat of the other tribes, just that Jacob placed a red string on the cuffs. Through the ages, there is no written mention in the Torah, Halacha, or Kabbalah about requiring the tying a red string around the wrist. Those sources mention red strings as a good omen. It is not evident if they were widely worn. The only case we find a public exhortation to wear red strings is in the 1490s, when Jews were not allowed to wear tefillin. Rabbi Abraham Saga recommended Jews to wear a red string on their hands, to remember the commandment of tefillin. Modern trend. Today in Israel, it is common to see elderly women peddling scarlet thread for pilgrims and tourists, especially in the old city of Jerusalem. Outside of Israel in the late 1990s, the red string became popular with many celebrities, including many non-Jews, including Madonna and her children. Additional celebrities have worn the scarlet thread, such as Leonardo DiCaprio, Michael Jackson, Ariana Grande, and Tucker Carlson. The wider popularity is often linked to Philip Brooks' Kabbalah Center. It also gained a surge in sales for Madonna, according to editors of Changing Fashion, A Critical Introduction to Trend Analysis and Cultural Meaning, 2007. See also.
Okay.
Practical Kabbalah, Hebrew, Kabbalah Masid, in historical Judaism, is a branch of Jewish mysticism that concerns the use of magic. It was considered permitted white magic and all magic by its practitioners, reserved for the elite, who could separate its spiritual source from clippeth realms of evil if performed under circumstances that were holy, QD, and pure, Tuma and Tahara. The concern of overstepping Judaism's prohibitions against impure magic ensured it remained a minor tradition in Jewish history. Its teachings include the use of divine and angelic names for amulets and incantations. Practical Kabbalah is mentioned in historical texts, but most Kabbalists have taught that its use is forbidden. It is contrasted with the mainstream tradition in Kabbalah of Kabbalah Ayunit, contemplative Kabbalah, which seeks to explain the nature of God and the nature of existence through theological study and Jewish meditative techniques. According to Gershom Scholem, many of the teachings of practical Kabbalah predate and are independent of the theoretical Kabbalah, which is usually associated with the term. Historically speaking, a large part of the contents of practical Kabbalah predate those of the speculative Kabbalah and are not dependent on them. In effect, what came to be considered practical Kabbalah constituted an agglomeration of all the magical practices that developed in Judaism from the Talmudic period down through the Middle Ages. The doctrine of the Sefer hardly ever played a decisive role in these practices. History. Early practices. Halakha, Jewish religious law, forbids divination and other forms of soothsaying, and the Talmud lists many persistent yet condemned divining practices. The very frequency with which divination is mentioned is taken as an indication that it was widely practiced in the folk religion of ancient Israel, and a limited number of forms of divination were generally accepted within all of Israelite society, the most common being oneiromancy, interpretation of dreams for prophetic meanings. Other magical practices of Judaic folk religion which became part of practical Kabbalah date from Talmudic times and include the making of amulets and other folk remedies using the esoteric names of angels.
Merkaba, that means chariot.
In Talmudic and Gaonic times, rabbinic mysticism focused around exegesis of Ezekiel's vision of the divine chariot throne, and meditative introspective ascent into the heavenly chambers. This elite practical mysticism, as described in the esoteric Hekelic literature, incorporated and merged into magical incantation elements. The Talmud and Midrash refer to this as using the divine name for theurgic practical ascent, as in the story of the 10 martyrs who inquired in heaven of the decree. In the Hekelic literature, angels guarding each level are meditatively bound by formulae and seals to allow entry. Medieval Hasidic Ashkenaz and the Sefer Yetzirah. In the 13th century, one problem which intrigued the Ashkenazi Hasidim, literally the pious of Germany, was the possibility of the creation of life through magical means. They used the word golem literally, shapeless or lifeless matter, to refer to an hypothetical homunculus given life by means of the magical invocation of divine names. This interest inspired an entire cycle of legend revolving around the golem which continued into the 18th century. The identification of the ancient Sefer Yetzirah concerning the creative force of the Hebrew letters as the means to create a golem was derived from interpretation of two statements in the Babylonian Talmud. Tractate Sanhedrin. One relates that Amor Abba ben Joseph Barana, Rava, created a person. In the second, two other sages were studying the laws of creation and created a third-born calf that they ate for a celebration. Medieval separation of conceptual and practical Kabbalah. The separation of the mystical and magical elements of Kabbalah, dividing it into speculative theological Kabbalah, Kabbalah Ayunit, with its meditative traditions, and theurgic practical Kabbalah, Kabbalah Masid, had occurred by the beginning of the 14th century. Many traditional speculative Kabbalists disapproved of practical Kabbalah, including Abraham Abulafia, who strongly condemned it, while the great majority of historical Kabbalistic involvement, writing and development concerns the theological Kabbalah. The majority of practical Kabbalistic writings were never published. One important tradition of practical Kabbalah thrived in Spain during the second half of the 15th century, before the Alhambra decree. The main text of the tradition was called Sefer HaMashit. The practitioners of this tradition were described by Moshe Adel as interested in demonology and the use of coercive incantations to summon demons, angels, and even God in order to hasten the Messianic age. Joseph Delarinas, 1418-1472, failure with his students in this, was considered a warning by later Kabbalists of the potential perils of involvement with Kabbalistic practice. Ban of Safe Kabbalistic Renaissance. In the 16th century, Isaac Luria, who opposed Kabbalah Masid and forbade his students from writing amulets and using other techniques of practical Kabbalah, evolved a form of exorcism which effectively transferred techniques from practical to speculative Kabbalah. While this led to the displacement of magical formulas and rites by contemplative exercises, the old forms of practical Kabbalah continued to exert broad appeal. Luria's position as the central teacher of modern Kabbalah, the foundation for later Hasidism, gives his proscription authoritative force. He taught that in our generations, without the temple in Jerusalem and its ashes of the red heifer to purify, the pursuit of the realm of practical Kabbalah by a person with an impure body is very detrimental. Early modern Baal Shem and other developments. The traditional role of the Baal Shem healer involved accepted methods between borderline practical Kabbalah and meditative Kabbalah, such as amulets and psychic abilities. Among recorded figures from early modern times were Elisha Baal Shem of Cal, 1550-1583, and the Baal Shem of London, 1708-1782. Yisrael Baal Shem Tov began his activity as a traditional Baal Shem, before founding Hasidism, while the Association of the Maharal of Prague, 1520-1609, with the creation of a golem only emerged in later times. Contemporary tradition records Elisha Baal Shem as creating a golem. The Sabbatean mystical heresies of Sabbatay Zevi, 1626-1676, and Jacob Frank, 1726-1791, led to the 1750s accusation of Jonathan Ebesh TZ by Jacob Eden of being a secret Sabbatean. It was chiefly based on the interpretation of some amulets prepared by Ebesh TZ, in which Eden saw Sabbatean illusions. The leader of Mignactic Lithuanian Judaism, the Kabbalist Vilna Gaon, 1720-1797, related that in his youth he had attempted to make a golem, but stopped when he perceived a spirit of impurity involved. Rabbi Aharon Yehuda of Cal, a practitioner of practical Kabbalah, and Baal Shem, was said to have created a golem through use of the divine name. Rabbi Yitzhak Adis Halpern, a practitioner of practical Kabbalah, and Baal Shem, was said to have saved a ship from capsizing, and to have exorcised a demon. Rabbi Naphtali Katz of Poznan was said to have brought a dead man back to life to free his wife from a guna. Rabbi Hirsch Frankel was sentenced to imprisonment in Germany in 1713, on the basis of having a library of books said to contain examples of sorcery, such as how to use oaths and amulets to overcome demons, see the future, and speak to the dead. Divine intercession through Devikut by the Hasidic Tzaddik. In Hasidism, the displacement of practical Kabbalah using directly magical means, by conceptual and meditative trends gained much further emphasis, while simultaneously instituting meditative theurgy for material blessings at the heart of its social mysticism. Hasidism internalized Kabbalah through the psychology of Devikut, cleaving to God, and cleaving to the Tzaddik, Hasidic Rebbe. In Hasidic doctrine, the Tzaddik channels divine spiritual and physical bounty to his followers by altering the will of God, uncovering a deeper concealed will, through his own Devikut and self-nullification. Dr. Meserich is concerned to distinguish this theory of the Tzaddik's will altering and deciding the divine will, from directly magical process. This rendered the external methods of practical Kabbalah, its willpower over angels and lower spiritual forces, as unnecessary and a hindrance, though some Hasidic leaders retained use of traditional amulets at the borderline of practical Kabbalah. This change was manifested in the personal life of Hasidism's founder, the Baal Shem Tov, 1698-1760, in his move from Baal Shem to the prototype of Hasidic leader. While a Baal Shem, he used amulets. At the end of his life, the Baal Shem Tov never wrote the names of God, only his own name in amulets. Yisrael ben Sarah or Yisrael ben Eliezer. A traditional story relates that on one early occasion the Baal Shem Tov resorted to practical Kabbalistic names of God, to cross a river and save his life. Afterward he regretted this, even though he had used it in holiness. He knew that his repentance was accepted when later, he found himself again in a similar situation. This time he did not use practical Kabbalah to perform the miracle, but instead used faith to give him the miraculous supernatural power to cross the river. He then knew that his teshuvah was complete. Hasidic thought teaches that its internalized mysticism enables the divine soul to affect the world through its essential connection to God, rather than divine manifestations of Kabbalah. Methods. Despite the prohibition against divination of the future, there is no prohibition against understanding the past nor coming to a greater understanding of present and future situations through inspiration gained by the Kabbalah, a subtle distinction and one often hard to delineate. The appeal to occult power outside the monotheist deity for divination purpose is unacceptable in Judaism, but at the same time it is held that the righteous have access to occult knowledge. Such knowledge can come through dreams and incubation, inducing clairvoyant dreams, metaposcopy, reading faces, lines on the face, or auras emanating from the face, Idirim and Madidim, spirit possession, and or various methods of scrying. The Midrash and Talmud are replete with the use of names of God and incantations that are claimed to effect supernatural or theurgic results. Most post-Talmudic rabbinical literature seeks to curb the use of any or most of these formulae. Term Kabbalah Masid, practical Kabbalah. There are various arguments for this. One stated by the medieval Rabbi Yaakov ben Moshe Levi Molin is that the person using it may lack the required grounding, and the ritual would be ineffective. Yet the interest in these rituals of power continued largely unabated until recently. The Talmud mentions the use of charms for healing, and a wide range of magical cures were sanctioned by rabbis. It was ruled that any practice actually producing a cure is not to be considered superstitious, and there has been a widespread practice of medicinal amulets and folk remedies, Sikala, in Jewish societies across time and geography. Image gallery. See also. Notes.
Okay. We're learning. The fuck is this?
Sefer HaRazim, Hebrew, Book of Secrets, is a Jewish magical text that dates to around the turn of the 4th century AD. According to the text's preface, it was given to Noah by the angel Raziel, and passed down throughout biblical history until it ended up in the possession of Solomon, for whom it was a great source of his wisdom and purported magical powers. This is not the same work as the Sefer Raziel HaMalak, which was given to Adam by the same angel, although both works stem from the same tradition. Large parts of Sefer HaRazim were incorporated into the Sefer Raziel under its original title. It is thought to be a source book for Jewish magic, calling upon angels rather than God to perform supernatural feats. Discovery. rediscovered in the 20th century by Mordecai Margalia, a Jewish scholar visiting Oxford in 1963. Using fragments found in the Cairo Genesa, he hypothesized that several fragments of Jewish magical literature shared a common source and was certain that he could reconstruct this common source. He achieved this in 1966 when he published Sefer HaRazim. The first English translation of the book was undertaken by Michael A. Morgan in 1983. The book is now in print. As of summer 2007, a new scholarly edition of the main extant manuscript, including Hebrew and Judeo-Arabic Genesa fragments and the 13th century Latin translation, was prepared by Bill Rebiger and Peter Sch. Fur in 2009, along with the translation and commentary in German in a separate volume. Dating. Margilius places the date of the original text to the early 4th or late 3rd century CE. This date is almost universally accepted. A notable exception is Ithamar Grunwald, who dates the text to the 6th or 7th century. Nonetheless, it is clear that this text predates Kabbalistic texts, including the Zohar, 13th century, the Bahir, 13th century as well, and possibly the Proto-Kabbalistic Sefer Yetzirah, 4th century. There are certain textual clues that point toward this early date. Specifically, the reference to the Roman indictions in 127-28 gives a clear terminus equal of 297 CE. Structure and content. The book is split into 7 sections, not including a preface which details the book's reception and transmission. Each of the first 6 sections corresponds to one heaven, or firmament, and contains a listing of angels and instructions to perform one or more magical rites. Only the throne of God and the 4 Hayats are in the 7th heaven. The 7 firmaments, each described with lengthy lists of angel names, are as follows. The angel names are from Rebiger and Sch. Fur, 2010. There is an uneasy tension between the Orthodox.
1. First firmament, 7 encampments led by angels of Arbinal, Tiger, Dinal, Kim, Yal, Himia, Asimer, Whisper, Wall. Second firmament, 12 steps, each with about 8 to 20 angels. Third firmament, 3 angelic princes, namely Imniel, Rutiel, and Iquiel. Fourth firmament, angelic princes who lead the sun during the day and night, about 30 princes during the day and about 30 princes during the night. Fifth firmament, 12 princes of glory who represent the 12 months. They are Spal, month of Nisan; Rigo, month of Yar; Dirnauer, month of Sivan; Nisan, month of Tammuz; Drangar, month of Ab; Merle, month of Elul; Puran, month of Tishrei; Building, month of Marheshvan; Angner, month of Kislev; Mipinal, month of Tevet; Hisbindram, month of Shvat; and Abrikiel, month of Adar. Sixth firmament, heads of the encampments in the east with 28 angelic leaders in their encampments, and west with 31 angelic leaders and their encampments. The heads of the encampments are Leparkim in the west and Tukpers in the east. Seventh firmament, throne of God and 4 Hyots.
Orthodox cosmogony. The book is split into 7 sections, not Holy Healing. There is an uneasy tension between the orthodox cosmogony of the book and the unorthodox praxis embodied in these magical rites. The book has obviously been edited by a rabbinical scribe, but the popular religion contained in the book is more or less intact. Some of the rituals purport to facilitate healing, prophecy, an attack upon one's enemy, and gaining good fortune. The number 7, the importance of divine names, and the prevalence of sympathetic magic all have significance in the literature of Middle Eastern magic. The text demonstrates strong syncretism of Jewish and Greek traditions. An example is a prayer to the sun god Helios to invoke him at night. Holy Helios, who rises in the east, good mariner, trustworthy leader of the sun's rays, reliable witness, who of old didst establish the mighty wheel of the heavens, holy orderer, ruler of the axis of heaven, Lord, brilliant leader, king, soldier, I, and son of man, present my supplication before you, that you will appear to me without causing me fear, and you will be revealed to me without causing me terror, and you will conceal nothing from me, and will tell me truthfully all that I desire. The prayer is preceded by instructions to call on several angels 21 times as well as the name of the sun. The reader is told to perform the ritual in white garments. The Mandianatra, angel or guardian, Tahal is mentioned as Ptil, Hebrew, in Sefer HaRazim, listed among other angels who stand on the 9th step of the 2nd firmament.
Gershom Sholem, who is this motherfucker? He's everywhere.
Gershom Skolem, Hebrew, December 5th, 1897, February 21st, 1982, was a German Jewish philosopher and historian, widely regarded as the founder of modern academic study of the Kabbalah. Skolem was appointed the first professor of Jewish mysticism at Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Biography. Gerhard Gershom Skolem was born in Berlin to Arthur Skolem and Betty Hirsch Skolem. His father was a printer. His older brother was the German communist leader Werner Skolem. He studied Hebrew and Talmud with an Orthodox rabbi. Stalin met Walter Benjamin in Munich in 1915. When the former was 17 years old and the latter was 23, they began a lifelong friendship that ended when Benjamin committed suicide in 1940 in the wake of Nazi persecution. Stalin dedicated his book Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, Die Mystik in Iron Hotster Mungen, based on lectures 1938-1940, to Benjamin. In 1915, Stalin enrolled at the Frederick William University in Berlin, today Humboldt University, where he studied mathematics, philosophy, and Hebrew. There he met Martin Buber, Shmuel Yosef Adnan, Chaim Nahman Bialik, Ahad Hahn, and Zalman Schazer. In Berlin, Stalin befriended Leo Strauss and corresponded with him throughout his life. He studied mathematical logic at the University of Jena under Gottlob Frege. He was in Bern in 1918 with Benjamin when he met Elsa, Isha Birchherd, who became his first wife. Stalin returned to Germany in 1919, where he received a degree in Semitic languages at the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich. Together with Benjamin, he established a fictitious school, the University of Uri. Stalin wrote his doctoral thesis on the oldest known Kabbalistic text, Sefer HaBaher. The following year it appeared in book form as Das Buch Baher, having been published by his father's publishing house. Drawn to Zionism and influenced by Buber, he immigrated in 1923 to the British Mandate of Palestine. It may be considered notable that though Stalin's allegiance to the Zionist cause, or the reclamation of Palestine by the Jewish diaspora, is incontrovertible, his relationship to the manifest ethics of Zionism was more ambiguous and critical than Buber's. After his emigration from Berlin to Palestine, Stalin became a librarian, heading the Department of Hebrew and Judaica at the National Library. In 1927 he revamped the Dewey Decimal System, making it appropriate for large Judaica collections. During the period that he was a librarian of ancient manuscripts at the Library of Hebrew University, fragments of the newly discovered Dead Sea Scrolls and inventory from the Cairo Genesis, just to name a few notable exemplars, moved through the collections he was overseeing. Though he started teaching smaller seminars at an earlier date, Stalin was not appointed as full professor of Hebrew University until Hitler rose to power. Stalin's brother Werner was a member of the ultra-left Fischer-Maslow group and the youngest ever member of the Reichstag, or Weimar Diet, representing the Communist Party of Germany. He was expelled from the party and later murdered by the Nazis during the Third Reich. Unlike his brother, Gershon was vehemently opposed to both communism and Marxism. In 1936, he married his second wife, Fania Freud. Fania, who had been his student and could read Polish, was helpful in his later research, particularly in regard to Jacob Frank. In 1946, Stalin was sent by the Hebrew University to search for Jewish books that had been plundered by the Nazis and help return them to their rightful owners. He spent much of the year in Germany and Central Europe as part of this project, known as Atzar Tagala. Stalin died in Jerusalem, where he is buried next to his wife in the Sanhedria Cemetery. Chiberchem Habermas delivered the eulogy. Academic career. Stalin became a lecturer at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He taught the Kabbalah and mysticism from a scientific point of view and became the first professor of Jewish mysticism at the university in 1933, working in this post until his retirement in 1965, when he became an emeritus professor. Stalin directly contrasted his historiographical approach on the study of Jewish mysticism with the approach of the 19th century school of the Wissenschaft des Judentums, science of Judaism, which sought to submit the study of Judaism to the discipline of subjects such as history, philology, and philosophy. According to Jeremy Adler, Stalin's thinking was both recognizably Jewish and deeply German, and changed the course of 20th century European thought. At the time Stalin entered his field of study, Jewish mysticism was acknowledged as Judaism's weakest scholarly link by many of the scholars, publishers and cultural leaders of the Jewish community and Gentile German scholars who sponsored Stalin's early career, including Martin Buber, Solomon Schocken, Franz Rosenzweig, Robert Eisler, Philip Bloch, Moses Marx, Clemens Bunker, Fritz Hammel and Walter Benjamin. Stalin told the story of his early research at the start of my path in 1922 when he went to Berlin to visit the only Jewish scholar who had engaged in the study of Kabbalah in the previous generation, gesturing at the rabbi's library of documents, manuscripts and autographs written by the authors of the Kabbalah, some of which had been inscribed in early modern or medieval centuries. Stalin remarked, "How wonderful it is, Herr Professor, that you have read and learned all this," to which the elderly gentleman replied, "What, and I also have to read all this nonsense?" Though he does not mention the name of the rabbi in his canonical account of this visit, Stalin explains elsewhere that this scholar once the rabbi of Poznan was Philip Bloch. The analysis of Judaism carried out by the Wissenschaft school was flawed in two ways. According to Stalin, it studied Judaism as a dead object rather than as a living organism, and it did not consider the proper foundations of Judaism, the non-rational force that, in Stalin's view, made the religion a living thing. In Stalin's opinion, the mythical and mystical components were at least as important as the rational ones, and he thought that they, rather than the minutiae of halakha, were the truly living core of Judaism. In particular, he disagreed with what he considered to be Martin Buber's personalization of Kabbalistic concepts as well as what he argued was an inadequate approach to Jewish history, Hebrew language, and the land of Israel. In the worldview of Stalin, the research of Jewish mysticism could not be separated from its historical context. Starting from something similar to the Geschichte of Friedrich Nietzsche, he ended up including less normative aspects of Judaism in the public history. Specifically, Stalin in his scholarly writing that Jewish history could be divided into three periods.
During the biblical period, monotheism battles mythology without completely defeating it. During the Talmudic period, some of the institutions, for example, the notion of the magical power of the accomplishment of the sacraments, are removed in favor of the purer concept of the divine transcendence. During the medieval period, the impossibility of reconciling the abstract concept of God of ancient Greek philosophy with the personal God of the Bible led Jewish thinkers such as Maimonides to try to eliminate the remaining myths and to modify the figure of the living God. After this time, mysticism, as an effort to find again the essence of the God of their fathers, became more widespread.
Elsewhere, in oral presentation or informal reflection, Stalin inflected the three periods within a different frame of reference. There was the primordial inscription and enunciation of the law in the Torah and the Talmud, the mystical reflections of the Kabbalah, and the post-metaphysical phase of mystical writings represented by, for example, the writings of Franz Kafka or the critical mysticism of his friend and correspondent Walter Benjamin. Stalin often told his students that the modern reader must read Franz Kafka in order to enter into the frame of mind native to the Kabbalah, and elsewhere remarked that, among the peculiarities Benjamin's writings was its enormous suitability for canonization. I might almost say for quotation as a kind of holy writ. The notion of the three periods, with its interactions between rational and irrational elements in Judaism, led Stalin to put forward some controversial arguments. He thought that the 17th century Messianic movement, known as Sabbatism, was developed from the Lurianic Kabbalah. In order to neutralize Sabbatism, Hasidism had emerged as a Hegelian synthesis. Many of those who joined the Hasidic movement, because they had seen it in an Orthodox congregation, considered it scandalous that their community should be associated with the heretical movement. In the same way, Stalin produced the hypothesis that the source of the 13th century Kabbalah. The notion of the three periods, with its interactions between rational and irrational elements in Judaism, led Stalin to put forward some controversial arguments. He thought that the 17th century Messianic movement, known as Sabbatism, was developed from the Lurianic Kabbalah. In order to neutralize Sabbatism, Hasidism had emerged as a Hegelian synthesis. Many of those who joined the Hasidic movement, because they had seen it in an Orthodox congregation, considered it scandalous that their community should be associated with the heretical movement. In the same way, Stalin produced the hypothesis that the source of the 13th century Kabbalah was a Jewish Gnosticism that preceded Christian Gnosticism. The historiographical approach of Stalin also involved a linguistic theory. In contrast to Weber, Stalin believed in the power of the language to invoke supernatural phenomena. In contrast to Walter Benjamin, he put the Hebrew language in a privileged position with respect to other languages, as the only language capable of revealing the divine truth. His special regard for the spiritual potency of the Hebrew language was expressed in his 1926 letter to Franz Rosenzweig regarding his concerns over the secularization of Hebrew. Stalin considered the Kabbalists as interpreters of the pre-existent linguistic revelation. Stalin and the Kabbalah. Stalin is acknowledged as the single most significant figure in the recovery, collection, annotation, and registration into rigorous Jewish scholarship of the canonical bibliography of mysticism and scriptural commentary that runs through its primordial phase in the Sefer Yetzirah, its inauguration in the Bahir, its exegesis in the Pardes and the Zohar to its cosmogonic, apocalyptic climax in Isaac Luria's Ein Sof that is known collectively as Kabbalah. After generations of demoralization and assimilation in the European Enlightenment, the disappointment of Messianic hopes, the famine of 1916 in Palestine, and in the midst of the catastrophe of the final solution in Europe, Stalin gathered and reassembled these sacred texts from many of the archives that had been disarranged, orphaned, confiscated under Nazi rule or otherwise washed up in genocide in the Middle East. Stalin began cataloging the flood of fragments and disordered, decontextualized manuscripts into an annotated and relatively organized sequence of texts available to scholars and seekers within the reception of this tradition in his 1930 bibliography of the Kabbalah, expanding this bibliography in his later works until the end of his life. Many other Jewish scholars assisted in this process of recovery once it was underway, but it is broadly recognized that Stalin initiated this process of textual and archival recovery and rebirth. As Stalin points out in his memoirs, the canon of sacred Jewish writings from the diaspora and the Middle Ages Kabbalah, had fallen into such a state of disrepair and oblivion, fragmented and defaced by persecutions from without as well as contortions, conversions and schisms from within Judaism, that many of the finest writings from the major currents of Jewish mysticism can only be found in long block quotations and anti-Semitic texts, where some incomplete had quoted and translated the most wonderful, the most profound things, had assembled them in order to decry them as blasphemies. This was a strong, somewhat exaggerated statement for expressive effect that Stalin attributes to Ernst Bloch in his memoirs, but there he co-signs the sentiment and appropriates it as his own description of the state of affairs in other places. Due to Stalin's efforts, and those of his students and colleagues, the confused and inscrutable condition of Kabbalistic bibliography and provenance would be significantly remedied after the end of the World Wars and the foundation of the modern state of Israel, where Stalin worked as head librarian of the National Library in Jerusalem. Friends, colleagues, and canonical affinities. Stalin's closest peers included, most famously, Walter Benjamin and Leo Strauss. As Stalin points out in his memoirs, the canon of sacred Jewish writings from the diaspora and the Middle Ages Kabbalah, had fallen into such a state of disrepair and oblivion, fragmented and defaced by persecutions from without as well as contortions, conversions and schisms from within Judaism, that many of the finest writings from the major currents of Jewish mysticism could only be found in long block quotations and anti-Semitic texts, where some nincompoop who had quoted and translated the most wonderful, the most profound things, had assembled them in order to decry them as blasphemies. This was a strong, somewhat exaggerated statement for expressive effect that Stalin attributes to Ernst Bloch in his memoirs, but there he co-signs the sentiment and appropriates it as his own description of the state of affairs in other places. Due to Stalin's efforts, and those of his students and colleagues, the confused and inscrutable condition of Kabbalistic bibliography and provenance would be significantly remedied after the end of the World Wars and the foundation of the modern state of Israel, where Stalin worked as head librarian of the National Library in Jerusalem. Friends, colleagues, and canonical affinities. Stalin's closest peers included, most famously, Walter Benjamin and Leo Strauss. Though his relationship with Franz Rosenzweig was of shorter duration, it was also a deeply influential one. Likewise, though Stalin was never directly introduced to Franz Kafka, he found out later in life that Kafka approved of his comments in a debate. Stalin and Benjamin's discussions of Kafka, spanning decades, played no small role in the elevation of Kafka's literary and epistolary writings to canonical status in both secular and mystical literature, as writing that was prophetic or premonitory of the Holocaust, while also having qualities of a kind of post-metaphysical Kabbalah. It is a measure of the depth of Stalin's friendship with Benjamin that he wrote two memoirs at the end of his life. His own autobiography tends to be less read or frequently cited than his autobiography of a friendship, recounting his lifelong relationship and work in partnership with Benjamin prior to the latter's death in flight from the Gestapo in 1940. In addition to his Kabbalah scholarship, a significant portion of Stalin's working life post-war was spent recovering, editing, and promoting the literary estate of his dead friend. Martin Buber was a patron, publisher, and sponsor of the careers of both Stalin and his best friend Benjamin, despite Benjamin's frequent ingratitude and incorrigible blowing of deadlines and Stalin's occasionally scathing critiques of the elder figure. Though Stalin's relationships with Hannah Arendt, Theodor Adorno, Hans Jonas, and Ernst Bloch were more characteristically turbulent than those relationships just mentioned, the frequent citation of these figures in Stalin's published writings and private correspondence demonstrates that they were among his closest and most influential colleagues. Selected letters from his correspondence with thinkers, critics, and philosophers have been published. Though appearing as a friend and product late in his career, Cynthia Ozick merits mention among those in Stalin's inner circle. His late career relationships with Allen Ginsberg, Harold Bloom, and George Steiner were also significant, though his relationship with Steiner was, characteristically, somewhat combative. Stalin was also friendly with the author Shai Adnan and the Talmudic scholar Saul Lieberman. As a major, unofficial but widely acknowledged figurehead of mystical, historical, and theological currents within both Reform and, much more controversially, conservative Judaism after World War II and the destruction of the European Jewry in the Holocaust, Stalin's stature within Jewish tradition is roughly comparable to the role played before the First World War and during the interwar period by Martin Buber. Debate with Hannah Arendt. In the aftermath of the Adolf Eichmann trial in Jerusalem, Stalin sharply criticized Hannah Arendt's book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, and decried her lack of solidarity with the Jewish people. Hebrew, love of one's fellow Jews. Ava IRL. Arendt responded that she never loved any collective group, and that she does not love the Jewish people but was only part of them. The bitter fight, which was exchanged in various articles, led to a rift between Stalin and Arendt, though they remained mutually respectful thereafter and continued to work alongside one another on various projects, particularly in their work on the literary estate of Walter Benjamin. In an apparently wrathful moment, Stalin wrote to Hans Piech that he knew Hannah Arendt when she was a socialist or half-communist, and when she was a Zionist. I am astounded by her ability to pronounce upon movements in which she was once so deeply engaged. In terms of a distance measured in light years and from such sovereign heights, differing perspectives on the appropriate penalty for Adolf Eichmann further illuminate differences between the two authors. Whereas Arendt felt that Eichmann should be executed, Stalin was opposed, fearing that his execution would serve to alleviate the Germans' collective sense of guilt. Awards and recognition. Literary influence. Various stories and essays of the Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges were
He won the Israel Prize in Jewish Studies. Maybe I'll win that someday. That'd be tight. My friends would think that'd be baller as fuck. I would feel like that is not as good as a Heisman Trophy, but still pretty tight. In 1968, he was elected president of the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities. In 1969, he received the Yakir Yerushalayim Worthy Citizen of Jerusalem Award. In 1977, he was awarded the Bialik Prize for Jewish Thought. What would you rather win, a Nobel Prize or a Heisman Trophy? Heisman Trophy all day long. Why? 7 of these motherfuckers, dog. Who gives a shit about the Nobel Prize? No, Nobel Peace Prize would be probably pretty tight. 7, bitch. You gonna be number 8? No. Why? I mean, maybe. They won't let me fucking walk on the real estate of that motherfucker. Why? Because that's slang dick. Really? Well, what do you want me to do about it, baby?
Inspired or influenced by Stalin's books, he has also influenced ideas of Umberto Eco, Jacques Derrida, Harold Bloom, Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben, and George Steiner. American author Michael Chabon cites Stalin's essay, The Idea of the Golem, as having assisted him in conceiving the Pulitzer Prize-winning book The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. The same essay influenced, and decided by, Bruce Chatwin's Odds. Chaim Podok's The Book of Lights features a lightly disguised Stalin as Jacob Keter. Selected works in English. See also. Reference.
Okay, his selected works. Major trends in Jewish mysticism, Jewish Gnosticism or Kabbal mysticism and Talmudic tradition. Arden and Sholem Eichmann in Jerusalem, exchange in letters between Gershom Sholem and Hannah Arendt in Encounter 22-1, 1964, On the Kabbalah and its Symbolism, 1965, The Messianic Idea in Jerusalem and Other Essays of Jewish Spirituality, translated 1971, Sabbatai Tzvi, The Mystical Messiah, 1973, Kabbalah, Meridian, 1974, Plume Books, 1987, reissue. Isbin, On Jews and Judaism in Crisis, Selected Essays, 1976, From Berlin to Jerusalem, Memoirs, Memories of My Youth, 1977, translated Harry Zone, 1980, Walter Benjamin, The Story of Friendship, translated Harry Zone, New York, Schocken Books, 1981, Origins of the Kabbalah, JPS, 1987, reissue, Isbin, Zohar, The Book of Solomon, Basic Readings of the Kabbalah, edited 1995, On the Mystical Shape of the Godhead, Basic Concepts of Kabbalah, 1997, The Fullness of Time Poems, translated Richard Saberth, 2003, On History and Philosophy of History in Naharim, Journal of German English, Journal of German Jewish Literature and Cultural History, on Franz Weisenweg and familiarity with Kabbalah literature in Naharim, Journal for German Jewish Literature and Cultural History, on the possibility of Jewish mysticism in our time, 1994, from Frankism to Jacobinism, 2019.
Trends. Commemoration. In his introduction to major trends in Jewish mysticism, the contents of the book were first assembled. Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism is a work on the history of the Jewish Kabbalah by Gershom Stalin, published in 1941. The contents of the book were first assembled in the order in which they will finally appear as a series of lectures delivered in 1938 at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, where he had been invited by Shalom Spiegel to give a course on Kabbalah. 2 of the 11 chapters or lectures appearing in the book were delivered on other occasions, as Stalin points out in the foreword. In a letter to to Walter Benjamin, written March 25th of that year. Stalin notes that all of his lectures have now been delivered such that he would be free to spend the remainder of his visit, lasting until that June, reviewing the Kabbalistic manuscripts available in the library of the seminary. Thus, the lectures were delivered between January and March. The historical backdrop and the timing of these lectures gives some context of the atmosphere in these lectures. A public decree that Adolf Hitler will assume absolute command of the German army, having dismissed his former field marshal, goes into effect on February 4th, 1938. Shortly after the lectures would have begun and the Wehrmacht rolls into Austria, inaugurating the Anschluss, Germany's annexation of Austria into the Third Reich, March 12th of that year during the final weeks of the course. Trends. In his introduction to major trends in Jewish mysticism, Stalin blames Jewish scholars of the Haskalah period, who, because of what he decried their antagonism and neglect of the study of Kabbalah, allowed the field be all but monopolized by charlatans and dreamers. Stalin's chapter on Merkaba mysticism and Jewish Gnosticism deals mainly with the mystical books the Lesser Hechelet and the Greater Hechelet, tracts written and edited between the 2nd and 6th century CE. Stalin also writes on other tracts like Shir Koma, the Book of Enoch, Sefer Yetzirah and the Sefer Habahir. In the book, Stalin, citing other scholars, observed similarities between the Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation, and early Islamic Gnosticism. Stalin subsequently explores the works of the German Jewish school of Hasidim, and of the works of Abraham Abulafia. Next, the most detailed investigation in Stalin's work is on the best-known work of Jewish mysticism, the Zohar. After that, Stalin explores Isaac Luria's teachings, Sabbatai Zevi and the Eastern European Hasidic movement. Commemoration. On the 50th anniversary of the book's publication, a conference of scholars convened in Berlin in Stalin's honor.
So I could end right now. Well, I would like to do a little debate or something, but I don't know. Should probably knock out some of this shit. Um, do you think this will be important? What you're doing right now in the future? Maybe. I mean, who knows if anything's really important. I like interviewing myself like this is 60 minutes, bitch. Why? Why not? I've got to maybe allegedly take a dump. All right, so I'm Andy Rooney, bitch. Really? Yeah, those fucking eyebrows. Messy ass office. Really? Yeah, dog. That's all I remember about that motherfucker. No. All I remember about Andy Rooney is if you fucking even make a fucking peep during Andy Rooney, your ass is gonna be in trouble. Really? With everybody. Andy Rooney? Oh. That shit. Andy Rooney? Grumpy ass fuck. You know, shit started going downhill when Andy Rooney started losing his touch. That's all I'm gonna say. All right, are you done though? Is that the end of your story, Andy Rooney lover? No. What in the fuck is this?
The Shir Kama, Hebrew, or dimensions of the body is a midrashic text that is part of the Hekelic literature. It purports to record, in anthropomorphic terms, the secret names and precise measurements of God's corporeal limbs and parts. The majority of the text is
Dog,
recorded in
that's
the form
not
of sayings
cool
or teachings
though.
that the angel Metatron revealed to the Tanna Rabbi Ishmael, who transmitted it to his students and his contemporary, Rabbi Akiva. It is also an exegetically analysis of Song of Songs 5:11-16
Rambam
and
would be
proclaims that
shitting
anyone who studies it
himself
is
over
guaranteed a
this.
portion in the world to come. Provenance and interpretation. Currently, the text exists only in fragmentary form, and scholars have debated how to date it appropriately. Modern academic scholars of Jewish mysticism, such as Gershom Scholem, think that it is from either the Tanaitic or the early Amoraic period. However, in the 12th century, the rationalist Jewish philosopher Maimonides declared the text to be a Byzantine forgery. Maimonides
Bingo.
also believed that the text was so heretical and contrary to proper Jewish belief that it should be burned. Sadia Gaon also expressed doubts about the origin of the text, and stated that since it is not found in either Mishnah or Talmud, and since we have no way of establishing whether or not it represents the words of Rabbi Ishmael, perhaps someone else pretended to speak in his name. Nonetheless, in the case that the text were somehow proven to be genuine, Sadia wrote that it would have to be understood in line with his theory of created glory, which explains the prophetic theophanies as visions not of God himself but of a luminous substance. Moses Marboni also wrote a philosophic work about the text entitled Ikarat al-Shir Kama, Epistle on Shir Kama, wherein he dismisses the blatant anthropomorphisms of Shir Kama as speaking strictly metaphorically. Rabbi Marboni's work in the Ikarat is a meditation on God, measure of all existing things. It is based on Abraham ibn Ezra's commentary on Exodus, and, with the aid of biblical and rabbinical passages, studies two kinds of knowledge: God's knowledge of his creatures, called knowledge of the face, and his creatures' knowledge of God, called knowledge of the back, an allusion to Exodus 33 hours and 23 minutes. See also. Reference it.
Who's this douche?
Moshe ben Estei Taku, Hebrew, FL 1250-1290 CE was a 13th century Tosafist from Tachov, Bohemia. The name Taku is a variant of Tachov, Bohemia, now Tachov, Czech Republic. Despite his own seemingly mystical orientation, Rabbi Taku is controversially known to have been an opponent of both the esoteric theology of the Ashkenazi Hasidim, particularly the Kalonymus family, i.e. followers of Judah ben Samuel of Regensburg, and the philosophical orientation of rabbinic rationalists such as Sadia Gaon, Maimonides, Abraham ibn Ezra, et al. He believed that both trends were a deviant departure from traditional Judaism, which he understood to espouse a literal perspective of both the biblical narrative and the Agadah of the sages. His opposition to all theological speculation earned him, in the opinion of Gershom's column, the title of one of the two truly reactionary Jewish writers of the Middle Ages, the other being Joseph Ashkenazi. Controversial views. Taku is often cited as contradicting Maimonides' third principle of faith for insisting that God can be corporeally manifested and that to maintain otherwise is heretical. For Taku, such a denial would be an infringement on God's omnipotence and that accordingly all anthropomorphic allusions to God in the Hebrew Bible are to be taken literally. However, Joseph Dan, an Israeli scholar of Jewish mysticism, takes issue with this widely held view of Taku's position and espouses a more nuanced depiction. Taku insists on a literal acceptance of the prophets' descriptions of their visions as well as the anthropomorphic references to God in Talmudic midrashic literature. He does not do so because of his belief in the literal veracity of these descriptions. He only insists that they represent the maximum that can be conveyed concerning God's essence and appearance, and that any further inquiry cannot lead to valid conclusions. God chose to reveal to us in the scriptures whatever is found in them. Man should be satisfied with that, and ask no more questions. It is not that Rabbi Moses Taku believed in an anthropomorphic God. Most probably, he did not. Writings. The Ketuvim is the principal text from which we know of Taku's thought. It was composed around 1220 and is largely contentious. It serves as both an attack on the theologians of his day who espouse non-literal understandings of Agadah, and as a means to attempt to demonstrate the validity of corporealism by citing proof texts from the Bible and the Talmud. Taku states that three theological catastrophes have occurred in Jewish history, each of which produced its school of heresy Christianity, spearheaded by Jesus, Karaite Judaism, spearheaded by Anon ben David, and the opinions expressed by Sadia Gaon in his beliefs and opinions and his commentary on the Sefer Yetzirah. Though the complete work is not known to have survived to this day, several major sections have endured and were first published in 1860 in Vienna.
You know, we've done this one before, but I want to hear it again.
SERYR, Book of Formation, or Jewish Mysticism. Early commentaries, such as the Kuzari, treated it as a treatise on mathematical and linguistic theory, as opposed to one about Kabbalah. The word Yetzir is more literally translated as formation. The word Bivaya being used for creation. The book is traditionally ascribed to the patriarch Abraham, although others attribute its writing to Rabbi Akiva or Adam. Modern scholars have not reached consensus on the question of its origins. According to Sadia Gaon, the objective of the book's author was to convey in writing how the things of our universe came into existence. Conversely, Judah Halevi asserts that the main objective of the book, with its various examples, is to give humans the means to understand the unity and omnipotence of God, which appear multiform on the one hand, and yet are uniform. The famous opening words of the book are as follows. By 32 mysterious paths of wisdom Yah has engraved, the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, the living God, the Almighty God, he that is uplifted and exalted, he that dwells forever, and whose name is holy, having created his world by three of SFR, namely, Sefer, a book, Sefer, a count, and Sipper, a story, along with 10 calibrations of empty space and 22 letters. 3 are principal i.e., 7 are double sounding, i.e., comma, and 12 are ordinary i.e. Origin. A cryptic story in the Babylonian Talmud states. On the eve of every Shabbat, Rav Hanina and Rav Hashea would sit and engage in study of Sefer Yetzirah, and create a delicious calf and eat it. According to modern historians, the origin of the text is unknown and hotly debated. Some scholars believe it might have an early medieval origin, while others cite earlier traditions appearing in the book. Most contemporary scholars date the text's authorship to the Talmudic period. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, the essential elements of the book are characteristic of the 3rd or 4th century. For a work of this nature, composed in the Geonic period, could have been cast only in the form of Jewish gnosis, which remained stationary after the 4th century, if indeed it had not already become extinct. The historical origin of the Sefer Yetzirah was placed by Richard August Reitzenstein in the 2nd century BCE. According to Christopher P. Benton, the Hebrew grammatical form places its origin closer to the period of the Mishnah, around the 2nd century CE. The division of the letters into the 3 classes of vowels, mudes, and sonants also appears in Hellenic texts. The date and origin of the book cannot be definitely determined as long as there is no critical text of it. The Editio Princeps, Mantua, 1562 contains 2 recensions, which were used in the main by the commentators of the book as early as the middle of the 10th century. The shorter version, Mantua I, was annotated by Dunash ibn Tamim or by Jacob ben Nassim, while the date and as regards the relation of the date and origin of the book cannot be definitely determined as long as there is no critical text of it. The Editio Princeps, Mantua, 1562 contains 2 recensions, which were used in the main by the commentators of the book as early as the middle of the 10th century. The shorter version, Mantua I, was annotated by Dunash ibn Tamim or by Jacob ben Nassim, while Sadia Gaon and Shabbatai Janala wrote commentaries on the longer recension, Mantua II. The shorter version was also used by most of the later commentators, such as Judah ben Barzillai and Nachmanides, and it was, therefore, published in the ordinary editions. The longer recension, on the other hand, was little known, the form given in the Editio Princeps of the Sefer Yetzirah being probably a copy of the text found in Donalo's commentary. In addition to these 2 principal recensions of the text, both versions contain a number of varied readings that have not yet been examined critically. As regards the relation of the 2 recensions, it may be said that the longer form contains entire paragraphs which are not found in the shorter, while the divergent arrangement of the material often modifies the meaning essentially. Although the longer recension doubtless contains additions and interpolations which did not form part of the original text, it has many valuable readings which seem older and better than the corresponding passages in the shorter version, so that a critical edition of the text must consider both recensions. Legendary origin. Mystics assert that the biblical patriarch Abraham used the same method to create the calf prepared for the 3 angels who foretold Sarah's pregnancy in the biblical account of Genesis 18:7. All the miraculous creations attributed to other rabbis of the Talmudic era are ascribed by rabbinic commentators to the use of the same book. Sefer Yetzirah's appendix, 615, declares that Abraham was the recipient of the divine revelation of mystic lore, so that the rabbis of the classical rabbinic era and philosophers such as Shabbatai Janala and Judah Halevi never doubted that Abraham was the author of the book. In Partis Ruminant, Moses ben Jacob Cordovero, Ramak mentions a minority opinion that Rabbi Akiva authored it, and takes it to mean that Abraham wrote it and Akiva redacted it to its current form. Jewish lore attributes the Kabbalah to Adam, and holds that from Adam it passed over to Noah, and then to Abraham, the friend of God. In a manuscript in the British Museum, the Sefer Yetzirah is called the Hilkach Yetzirah and declared to be esoteric lore not accessible to anyone but the truly pious. Manuscripts. The Sefer Yetzirah exists in many manuscripts, generally falling in categories known
Short
as
version language, the
the long
out
version
of
contains entire
version,
paragraphs which are not
version.
found in the short version, while the divergent arrangement of the material often modifies the meaning essentially. The short version comprises about 1,300 words and was annotated by Dunash ibn Tamim, and it formed the basis of the first printed Hebrew edition, published in Mantua in the year 1562, and most main versions printed thereafter. The long version is 2,500 words and is present with a commentary by Shabbat Danalo. It is frequently printed with this commentary as an appendix to editions of the short version. In the 13th century, Abraham Abulafia noted the existence of both of these versions. The Mantua 1562 edition was printed with the short version surrounded by commentaries attributed to Abraham ben David. On side of the page, Nachmanides, bottom of the page, and Moses Bodrel. Inside of the page, the printer notes that Bodrel followed the first two rabbis and also collected all other commentaries that preceded him. An appendix following this contains a pair of commentaries printed side by side, one attributed to Eliezer of Words, on the outside of the pages and the other to Sadia Gaon on the inside of the pages. At the end of the volume is found the long version. In the middle of the 16th century, the leader of the school of Saint Kabbalists, Moses Cordovero, established a working text based on 10 separate manuscripts. His student and successor Isaac Luria further redacted this to harmonize it with the Zohar, and then in the 18th century, the Vilna Gaon, known as the Gra, further redacted it. This text is called the Gra or Ari Gra version. In the 10th century, Sadia Gaon wrote his commentary based on a manuscript which was a reorganized copy of the longer version, now called the Sadia version. This was translated into French by Lambert and thence into English by Scott Thompson. This version and commentary was more philosophical in nature rather than mystical and had virtually no impact on subsequent Kabbalists. Influence. The Sefer Yetzirah is devoted to speculations concerning God's creation of the world. The ascription of its authorship to the biblical patriarch Abraham shows the high esteem that it enjoyed for centuries. It may even be said that this work had a greater influence on the development of the Jewish mind than almost any other book after the completion of the Talmud. The Sefer Yetzirah is exceedingly difficult to understand on account of its obscure style. The difficulty is rendered still greater by the lack of a critical edition, the present text being much interpolated and altered. Hence there is a wide divergence of opinion regarding the age, origin, contents, and value of the book. Jewish study. The history of the study of the Sefer Yetzirah is one of the most interesting in the records of Jewish literature. With the exception of the Bible, scarcely any other book has been the subject of so much annotation. An intimate relation exists between the Sefer Yetzirah and the later mystics, and although there is a marked difference between the later Kabbalah and the Sefer Yetzirah, for instance, the Sephirot of the Kabbalists do not correspond to those of the Sefer Yetzirah. The system laid down in the latter is the first visible link in the development of Kabbalistic ideas, instead of the immediate creation ex nihilo. Both works postulate a series of emanations of mediums between God and the universe, and both consider God as the first cause only, and not as the immediate efficient cause of the world. A book of the same name was circulated among the Ashkenazi Hasidim between the 11th and 13th centuries, for whom it became a source of practical Kabbalah. This book seems to be a mystic work on the 6 days of creation, and corresponded in part to the small Midrash, Seder Rabbi Bereshit. In Thelema. Charles Stansfield Jones, in his book called The Anatomy of the Body of God, has written interpretations of this book from the viewpoint of Thelema, a new religious movement founded by Aleister Crowley early in the 20th century. Teachings. Structure. The Sefer Yetzirah describes how the universe was created by the God of Israel. A list of all of God's Hebrew names appears in the first sentence of the book, through 32 wondrous ways of wisdom. The book describes the method for using the
10 numbers, Svirot, the origin of the Svirot of later Kabbalah, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, 3 mother letters, Aleph, Mem, Shin, 7 doubles, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Pei, Resh, Tav, 12 simples or elementals, He, Waw, Zion, Heth, Teth, Yod, Lamed, Nun, Semek, Ayin, Sadi, Kaf.
He was created by the God of Israel. A list of all of God's Hebrew names appears in the first sentence of the book, through 32 wondrous ways of wisdom. The book describes the method for using the 10 Sephirot and the 22 Hebrew letters to gain divine insight secret using Abraham's tongue. God's covenant with Abraham is described as being twofold. The phonetic system. The philological is discussed first, since it is necessary for an elucidation of the philosophical speculations of the work. The 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are classified both with reference to the position of the vocal organs in producing the sounds, and with regard to sonant intensity. In contrast to the Jewish grammarians, who assumed a special mode of articulation for each of the 5 groups of sounds, the Sefer Yetzirah says that no sound can be produced without the tongue, to which the other organs of speech merely lend assistance. Hence the formation of the letters is described as follows.
With the tip of the tongue and throat, between the lips of the tip of the tongue, in the middle of the tongue, by the tip of the tongue, by the tongue which lies flat and stretched, and by the teeth. The letters are distinguished, moreover, by the intensity of the sound necessary to produce them, and are accordingly divided into mutes, which are accompanied by sound, such as mem, sibilants, such as shin, which is therefore called hissing shin, aspirates, such as aleph, which holds a position between the mutes and sibilants, and is designated as an airy aleph, which holds a balance in the middle.
The letters are distinguished, moreover, by the intensity of the sound necessary to produce them, and are accordingly divided into. Besides these 3 letters, which are called mothers, a distinction is also drawn between the 7 double letters, which have 2 different sounds according to inflection, and the 12 simple letters, the remaining characters of the alphabet which represent only 1 sound each. Themes. Both the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, human, are viewed in this system as products of the combination and permutation of these mystic characters, and such a use of the letters by the Jews for the formation of the holy name for thaumaturgical purposes is attested by magic papyri that quote an angelic book of Moses, which was full of allusions to biblical names. The linguistic theories of the author of the Sefer Yetzirah are an integral component of its philosophy, its other parts being astrological and Gnostic cosmogony. The 3 letters Aleph, Mem, Shin, are not only the 3 mothers from which the other letters of the alphabet are formed, but they are also symbolic figures for the 3 primordial elements, the substances which underlie all existence. According to the Sefer Yetzirah, the first emanation from the spirit of God was the Ruach, our spirit, air, that produced water, which, in its turn, formed the genesis of fire. In the beginning, however, these three substances had only a potential existence, and came into actual being only by means of the three letters Aleph, Mem, Shin, and as these are the principal parts of speech, so those three substances are the elements from which the cosmos has been formed. The cosmos consists of three parts: the world, the year, or time, and man, which are combined in such a way that the three primordial elements are contained in each of the three categories. The water formed the earth, heaven was produced from the fire, and the Ruach produced the air between heaven and earth. The three seasons of the year, winter, summer, and the rainy season correspond to water, fire, and Ruach in the same way as man consists of a head, corresponding to fire, torso, represented by Ruach, and the other parts of the body, equivalent to water. The seven double letters produce the seven planets, the 7 days, and the seven apertures in man: 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and 1 mouth. Again, as the seven double letters vary, being pronounced either hard or soft, so the seven visible planets are in continuous movement, approaching or receding from the earth. The 7 days, in like manner, were created by the seven double letters because they change in time according to their relation to the planets. The seven apertures in man connect him with the outer world as the seven visible planets join heaven and earth. Hence, these organs are subject to the influence of the planets, the right eye being under Saturn, the left eye under Jupiter, and the like. The 12 simple letters were used to create the 12 signs of the zodiac, whose relation to the earth is always simple or stable, and to them belong the 12 months in time, and the 12 leaders in man. The latter are those organs which perform functions in the body independent of the outside world, being the hands, feet, kidneys, gall, intestines, stomach, liver, pancreas, and spleen, and they are, accordingly, subject to the 12 signs of the zodiac. In its relation to the construction of the cosmos, matter consists of the three primordial elements. They are not chemically connected with one another, but modify one another only physically. Power emanates from the 7 and the 12 heavenly bodies, or, in other words, from the planets and the signs of the zodiac. The dragon rules over the world, matter in the heavenly bodies, the sphere rules time, and the heart rules over the human body. The author sums up this explanation in a single sentence. The dragon is like to a king on his throne, the sphere like a king traveling in his country, and the heart like a king at war. Creation. To harmonize the Genesis creation narrative, which is a creatio ex nihilo, with the doctrine of the primordial elements, the Sefer Yetzirah assumes a double creation, one ideal and the other real. Their name is possibly derived from the fact that as numbers express only the relations of two objects to each other, so the 10 Sephirot are only abstractions and not realities. Again, as the numbers from 2 to 10 are derived from the number 1, so the 10 Sephirot are derived from 1. Their end is fixed in their beginning, as the flame is bound to the coal, I7. Hence the Sephirot must not be conceived as emanations in the ordinary sense of the word, but rather as modifications of the will of God, which first changes to air, then becomes water, and finally fire, the last being no further removed from God than the first. The Sefer Yetzirah shows how the Sephirot are a creation of God and the will of God in its varied manifestations. Besides these abstract 10 Sephirot, which are conceived only ideally, the 22 letters of the alphabet produce the material world, for they are real, and are the formative powers of all existence and development. By means of these elements the actual creation of the world took place, and the 10 Sephirot, which before this had only an ideal existence, became realities. This is, then, a modified form of the Talmudic doctrine that God created heaven and earth by means of letters. Iraq 58a. The explanation on this point is obscure since the relation of the 22 letters to the 10 Sephirot is not clearly defined. The first sentence of the book reads, 32 paths, marvels of wisdom, hath God engraved. These paths being then explained as the 10 Sephirot and the 22 letters, while the Sephirot are expressly designated as abstracts. It is said of the letters, 22 letters, God drew them, cued them, combined them, weighed them, interchanged them, and through them produced the whole creation and everything that is destined to come into being. 2. The letters are neither independent substances nor yet as mere forms. They seem to be the connecting link between essence and form. They are designated as the instruments by which the real world, which consists of essence and form, was produced from the Sephirot, which are merely formless essences. Theories of contrast in nature. In addition to the doctrine of the Sephirot and the letters, the theory of contrasts in nature, or of the syzygies, pairs, as they are called by the Gnostics, occupies a prominent place in the Sefer Yetzirah. This doctrine is based on the assumption that the physical as well as the spiritual world consist of pairs mutually at war, but equalized by the unity, God. Thus in the three prototypes of creation the contrasting elements fire and water are equalized by air. Corresponding to this are the three rulers among the letters, the mute mem contrasting with the hushing sheen, and both being equalized by Aleph. 7 pairs of contrasts are enumerated in the life of man.
Life and death, peace and war, wisdom and folly, wealth and poverty, beauty and ugliness, fertility and sterility, elship and servitude.
From these premises, the Sefer Yetzirah draws the important conclusion that subjective good and evil have no real existence. For since everything in nature can exist only by means of its contrast, a thing may be called good or evil according to its influence over man by the natural course of the contrast. The book teaches that man is a free moral agent, and therefore a person is rewarded or punished for his or her actions. While the ideas of heaven and hell are left unmentioned in the book, it teaches that the virtuous man is rewarded by a favorable attitude of nature, while the wicked man finds it hostile to him. Gnostic elements. Sefer Yetzirah is similar to various Gnostic systems. As the Sefer Yetzirah divides the Hebrew alphabet into 3 groups, so the Gnostic Marcus divided the Greek letters into 3 classes, regarded by him as the symbolic emanations of the 3 powers which include the whole number of the upper elements. Both systems attach great importance to the power of the combinations and permutations of the letters in explaining the genesis and development of diversity from unity. The Clementine literature present another form of gnosis that agrees with the Sefer Yetzirah. As in the latter, God is not only the beginning but also the end of all things. So in the former he is the arche, koine Greek, Hebrew, and telos, of all that exists. And the Clementine writings furthermore teach that the spirit of God is transformed into pneuma, and this into water, which becomes fire and rocks, thus agreeing with the Sefer Yetzirah, where the pneuma, air, water, and fire are the first 4 Sephirot. The remaining 6 Sephirot, or the limitations of space by the 3 dimensions in a twofold direction, are also found in the Clementina, where God is described as the boundary of the universe and the source of the 6 infinite dimensions. The telly, perhaps meaning curled one as a coiled serpent, which plays such a vital part in the astrology of the book, is probably an ancient Semitic figure. At all events its name is an Akkadian loanword. The dragon is often understood as the starry constellation Draco, and by extension it represents the cosmic axis, equivalent to the north-south pole, because this constellation coils around Polaris and thus around the celestial axis, as it intersects the northernmost part of the celestial sphere. Factorial. In discussing the number of words that can be formed from the telly, perhaps meaning curled one as a coiled serpent, which plays such a vital part in the astrology of the book, is probably an ancient Semitic figure. At all events its name is an Akkadian loanword. The dragon is often understood as the starry constellation Draco, and by extension it represents the cosmic axis, equivalent to the north-south pole, because this constellation coils around Polaris and thus around the celestial axis, as it intersects the northernmost part of the celestial sphere. Factorial. In discussing the number of words that can be formed from the Hebrew alphabet, Sefer Yetzirah includes one for the earliest known descriptions of the mathematical function factorial, enumerating its first 7 values and emphasizing its rapid growth. Influence. In 2002, American mathematician Robert P. C. DeMary's named the Pathians, or the 32-dimensional hypercomplex numbers, after the 32 paths of wisdom in the Sefer Yetzirah. Editions and translations. Translations. See also. Notes. Is that it can be only not say for some type of sacrificial or temple use. So watch this. So what's Aleph cover? No someone gave her the sheet. The African ball. What does it mean? African ball. Rashi says, Achshav, hello, the Achas man. That's an appellation for now. Rather again, sometime later now. Moses ben Jacob Cordovero, Hebrew, Moshe Cordovero, 1522-1570, was a central figure in the historical development of Kabbalah, leader of the mystical school in the Ottoman Empire in 16th century Save, located in the modern state of Israel. He is known by the acronym Rama. After the medieval flourishing of Kabbalah, centered on the Zohar, attempts were made to give a complete intellectual system to its theology, such as by Meir ben Ezekiel ibn Gabe. Influenced by the earlier success of Jewish philosophy in articulating a rational study of Jewish thought, Cordovero produced the first full integration of the previous differing schools in Kabbalistic interpretation. While he was a mystic inspired by the opaque imagery of the Zohar, Cordoverian Kabbalah utilized the conceptual framework of emanating cause and effect from the infinite to the finite in systemizing Kabbalah, the method of philosophical style discourse he held most effective in describing a process that reflects sequential logic and coherence. His encyclopedic works became a central stage in the development of Kabbalah. Immediately after him and Save, Isaac Luria articulated a subsequent system of Kabbalistic theology, with new suprarational doctrines recasting previous Kabbalistic thought. While Lurianism displaced the Cordoverian scheme and became predominant in Judaism, its followers read Cordoverian works in harmony with their teachings, where, to them, Lurianism described the world of rectification, Cordovero described the pre-rectification world. Both articulations of the 16th century mystical renaissance and Save gave Kabbalah an intellectual prominence to rival medieval Jewish rationalism, whose social influence on Judaism had waned after the expulsion of Jews from Spain. Biography. Early life. The name Cordovero indicates that his family originated in Córdoba, Spain, and perhaps fled from there during the expulsion of 1492 ensuing from the Spanish Inquisition. His Hebrew signature, however, Cordovero, strongly suggests a long-lasting residence in Portugal. Moses was either born in or moved to Safed in the land of Israel, the city that was soon to become famed as a center of Kabbalah and mystical creativity. Although not involved in mystical studies until his 20th year, he soon gained a reputation as an extraordinary genius and a prolific writer. Besides his knowledge in Kabbalah, he was a Talmudic scholar and a man of commanding mastery in Jewish philosophy who was respected in these fields. Contrary to popular belief, however, he was not one of the rabbis who received the special Seneca, ordination from Jacob Rab in 1538, alongside Joseph Cairo, Cordovero's teacher of Halakha, Moses ben Joseph Titrani, Yusuf Sagis, and Moshe Alshich. As a whole, Cordovero's contributions to posterity were in speculative and performative Kabbalah. However, during his lifetime, he was the renowned head of the yeshiva for Portuguese immigrants in Save. Scholarship. According to his testimony in the introduction to Partis Ruminant, Orchard of Pomegranates, in 1542, at the age of 20, Moses heard a heavenly voice urging him to study Kabbalah with his brother-in-law, Shlomo Alkabetz, composer of the mystical song Lechadodi. He was thus initiated into the mysteries of the Zohar. The young Moses not only mastered the text but also decided to organize the Kabbalistic themes leading to his day and present them in an organized fashion. This led to the composition of his first book, Partis Ruminant, which was completed in 1548 and secured his reputation as a brilliant Kabbalist and a lucid thinker. The Partis, as it is known, was a systematization of Kabbalistic thought up to that time and featured the author's attempt at reconciling early schools with the conceptual teachings of the Zohar to demonstrate an essential unity and self-consistent philosophical basis of Kabbalah. His second work, a magnum opus entitled Precious Light, or YQR, was a 16-volume commentary on the Zoharic literature in its entirety and the work to which the Ramak had devoted most of his life. Some other books for which he is known are the Tomer Devorah, Palm Tree of Deborah, in which he utilizes the Kabbalistic concepts of the Sefer to illuminate a system of morals and ethics, or Murat, a justification of and insistence upon the importance of Kabbalah study and an introduction to the methods explicated in Partis Ruminant, ViralRabbi, a highly abstract treatise on Kabbalistic concerns revolving around the Godhead and its relationship to the Sefer, and the Sefer Jerushin, a short and intimate composition which features the highly devotional slant of Cordovero, as well as his asceticism and religious piety. Certain parts of Cordovero's works are still manuscripts, whereas his existing writings suggest that he had many other compositions that he either intended to write or had written, but which were lost. Disciples. Around 1550, he founded a Kabbalah academy in Safed in the Damascus Eolit of Ottoman Palestine, which he led for approximately 20 years until his death. He is buried in the old cemetery of Safed. His disciples included Eliyahu Dividas, author of the Rishit Chachma, Beginning of Wisdom, and Hayim Bible, who later became the official recorder and disseminator of the teachings of Isaac Luria. Cordovero was survived by a wife, the sister of Solomon Alkabetz, whose name remains unknown, and by his son Jedaliah, 1562-1625. Jedaliah was the impetus behind the publication of some of Cordovero's books in Venice between 1584 and 1587. Jedaliah was buried in Jerusalem in the Damascus Eolit, where he had spent most of his adult life after returning from Venice. Succession of Kabbalistic interpretation after the Ramak. According to tradition, Isaac Luria, known by the acronym Ari or Arizal, arrived in Safed on the exact day of the funeral of Moshe Cordovero in 1570. When he joined in the funeral procession, he realized that only he saw a pillar of fire following the Ramak's presence. The Zohar describes this spiritual revelation as assigned to the individual who sees it, that he is meant to inherit the succession of leadership from the departed person. However, as Luria had been instructed to find his chosen disciple in Safed, Hayim Bible, to reveal his new teachings to, he avoided accepting Kabbalistic leadership until 6 months later, when Rabbi Hayim Bible approached him. The Ari only lived for 2 years after this, until 1572, but in those few months he revolutionized the conceptual system of Kabbalah, with his new doctrines and philosophical system. The The two schools of Kordovran and Lurianic Kabbalah give two alternative accounts and synthesis of the complete theology of Kabbalah until then, based on their interpretation of the Zohar. After the public dissemination of the Zohar in medieval times, various attempts were made to give a complete intellectual system of theology to its different schools and interpretations, influenced by the earlier rational success of Jewish philosophy, especially the work of Maimonides, in producing a systematic intellectual articulation of Judaism. The Rambam achieved the first accepted systemization of Kabbalah, based on its rational categorization and study. Subsequent followers of the Ari saw their teachings as harmonious with, and a deeper interpretation of the Zohar in the Ramic system. But the new system of Isaac Luria revealed completely new doctrines, as well as new descriptions of the earlier ideas of Kabbalah. In time, Lurianic Kabbalah emerged as the dominant system. However, the works of the Ramic are still highly esteemed and widely studied, as well. Among the Ramic's most visible books. Notes.
This motherfucker wrote Partis Ramonim, an orchard of pomegranates, Ramak's first book, an encyclopedic synthesis of the main trends of Kabbalistic thought, with numerous diagrams, which secured his reputation as a mystical genius. Or Yakar, Precious Light, a magnum opus of some 16 volumes in its extant manuscript form, which had occupied Ramak throughout his adult life. A classical commentary on the Zohar, Sefer Yetzirah, and the Zoharic literary offshoots. Its publication ended around 2005 in Jerusalem, some 22 volumes. Certain parts, such as Tefillah LaMoshe and Shir Koma, were previously published as separate works. Tomer Devorah, The Palm Tree of Devorah, a popular work of Musar literature based on Kabbalistic principles. It has been translated into English by Louis Jacob 1960 and by Rabbi Moshe Miller 1993. The first chapter was translated with an extensive commentary by Henry Abramson. Oh, yeah, I remember reading through this. Ilima Rabadi, of which 2/3 is still unpublished. We'll publish that shit. I think I said that last time. On Arav, a pleasant light, or perhaps a mixed light, or a darkened light. An annotated English edition was produced by Ira Robinson, 1994. Sefer Gershon, The Book of Banishments, a disclosure of Ramak's fellowship and their devotional piety in Galilean outskirts of Sfat, a highly informative text concerning Ramak's devotional piety and the use of landscape as a negotiator between heaven and earth.
Partis Ruminant, meaning orchard of pomegranates, with the word partis having the double meaning of Kabbalistic exegesis, a primary text of Kabbalah composed in 1548 by the Jewish mystic Moses ben Jacob Cordovero in Saith Galilee. 16th century Saith saw the theoretical systemization of previous Kabbalistic theological views. Partis Ruminant was the first comprehensive exposition of medieval Kabbalah, though the subsequent 16th century Saith mythological scheme of Isaac Luria superseded its rationally influenced scheme. Cordovero indicates in his introduction that the work is based upon notes he took during his study of the Zohar, the foundational work of the Kabbalah. He notes that he composed the Partis Ruminant not to become lost and confused in its depths. The work is an encyclopedic summary of the Kabbalah, including an effort to elucidate all the tenets of the Kabbalah, such as the doctrines of the Sefer, emanation, the divine names, the import and significance of the alphabet, etc. The Partis Ruminant was one of the most widely read and influential Kabbalistic works. It was considered a basis of the Kabbalistic outlook until the works of Isaac Luria ultimately overshadowed it. The Partis Ruminant comprised 32 gates or sections, subdivided into chapters. It was first published in Crack W in 1591. A PR-sis of it was published under the title of Sis Ruminant by Samuel Gallico and Menachem Azariah Tofano, Mordecai Chrysidram, and Isaiah Horowitz wrote subsequent commentaries on some parts of it. The original work was partly translated into Latin by Bartolozzi, by Joseph Science, in De Sanctissima Trinita contra Judas, Rome, 1664, by Athanasius Kircher, Rome, 1652-54, and by Christian Norton Rosenroth, in Kabbalah Denudita, Salzburg, 1677. See also. About all the spiritual tools that I possess. Be honest about what I possess. Contents. The primary texts of Kabbalah were allegedly once part of an ongoing oral tradition. The written texts are obscure and difficult for readers who are unfamiliar with Jewish spirituality, which assumes extensive knowledge of the Tanakh, Hebrew Bible, Midrash, Jewish hermeneutic tradition, and Halakha, Jewish religious law. The Torah. For Kabbalists, 10 utterances in Genesis with which God created the world are linked to the 10 Sefer, the divine structure of all beings. According to the Zohar and the Sefer HaGedah, the Torah is synonymous with God. More specifically, in the Sefer HaGedah, the letters in the Torah are the forms of God. The Kabbalist looks beyond the literal aspects of the text to find the hidden mystical meaning. The text not only offers traditions and ways of thinking, but it also reveals the reality of God. One of the first Jewish philosophers, Philo of Alexandria, 20 BCE 40, said that Abraham knew the essential Torah before it was given, because Abraham was himself a philosopher. He observed the world around him and looked inside himself to discover the laws of nature. While this is not strictly speaking a mystical notion, it does introduce the idea of an inner Torah that underlies the written word. Much later, in the 19th century, the Sfazans, a Hasidic Rebbe, made the assertion that it was actually Abraham's deeds that became Torah. The Torah is thus seen as an ongoing story played out through the lives of the nation of Israel. The Torah is an important text because even the most minor traditions of the Kabbalah will acknowledge its aspects of the divine. Textual antiquity. Jewish forms of esotericism existed over 2,000 years ago. Then Sarah warns against it, saying, "You shall have no business with secret things." Nonetheless, mystical studies were undertaken and resulted in mystical literature. The first to appear within Judaism was the apocalyptic literature of the second and first pre-Christian centuries, and which contained elements that carried over to later Kabbalah. According to Josephus, such writings were in the possession of the Essenes and were jealously guarded by them against disclosure, for which they claimed a certain antiquity. See Philo, De Vita Contemplativa, 3, and Hippolytus, Refutation of all Heresies, 9, 27. That books containing secret lore were kept hidden away by, or for, the enlightened is stated in 2 Esdras 14, 45-46, where Pseudo-Ezra is told to publish the 24 books of the canon openly that the worthy and the unworthy may alike read, but to keep the 70 other books hidden in order to deliver them only to such as be wise. Compare Dan 12, 10, for in them are the spring of understanding, the fountain of wisdom, and the stream of knowledge. Instructed for the study of the development of Jewish mysticism is the Book of Jubilees, written around the time of John Hyrcanus. It refers to mysterious writings of Jared, Cain, and Noah, and presents Abraham as the renewer, and Levi as the permanent guardian of these ancient writings. It offers a cosmogony based upon the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, connected with Jewish chronology and messianology, while at the same time insisting upon the heptad, 7, as the holy number, rather than upon the decadic, 10, system adopted by the later Haggadists and observable in the Sefer Yetzirah. The Pythagorean idea of the creative powers of numbers and letters was shared with Sefer Yetzirah and was known in the time of the Mishnah before 200 CE. Early elements of Jewish mysticism can be found in the non-biblical texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls, such as the songs of the Sabbath sacrifice. Some parts of the Talmud and the Midrash also focus on the esoteric and mystical, particularly Hayyuga 12b 14b. Many esoteric texts, among them ViralRabbi, Sefer HaKana, Sefer Piliyah, Midrash Otiyah Rabbi Akiva, the Bahir, and the Zohar, claim to be from the Tunaitic era, 10 to 120 CE, but all of these works, with the exception of Hekkelot, were actually composed 801,000 years later. Kabbalists attribute Sefer Yetzirah to the patriarch Abraham, though the text itself offers no claim as to authorship and modern scholars consider it medieval. This book, which is noted for its early use of the word Sefer, became the object of systematic study by medieval mystics. Kabbalists attribute Sefer Yetzirah to the patriarch Abraham, though the text itself offers no claim as to authorship and modern scholars consider it medieval. This book, which is noted for its early use of the word Sefer, became the object of systematic study by medieval mystics. Primary texts. Hekkelot literature. Hekkelot literature, Hekkelot, palaces, are not a single text. Rather, they are a genre of writings with shared characteristics. These texts focus primarily either on how to achieve a heavenly ascent through the Hekkelot and what to expect there, or on drawing down angelic spirits to interact and help the adept. There are several larger documents of the Hekkelot, such as ViralRabbi, in which 6 of the 7 palaces of God are described. Hekkelot Zutari, Shir Kama and 6th century 3 Enoch, as well as hundreds of small documents, many little more than fragments. Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation, also known as Hilkot Yetzirah, Laws of Creation, is a primary source of Kabbalistic teaching. The first commentaries on this small book were written in the 10th century. A book by the title is mentioned in the Talmud, and its linguistic organization of the Hebrew alphabet could be from as early as the 2nd century. Its historical origins remain obscure, although Kabbalists believe that it was authored by Abraham and edited by Rabbi Akiva. It exists today in a number of editions, up to 2,500 words long, about the size of a pamphlet. It organizes the cosmos into 32 packs of wisdom, comprising 10 sephirot, numbers, not the sephirot of later Kabbalah, and 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It uses this structure to organize cosmic phenomena ranging from the seasons of the calendar to the emotions of the intellect, and is essentially an index of cosmic correspondences. Bahir. Bahir, Illumination, also known as Midrash of Rabbi Nehemiah ben Hakana, a book of special interest to students of Kabbalah because it serves as a kind of epitome that surveys the essential concepts of the subsequent literature of Kabbalah. It is about 12,000 words, about the size of a magazine. Despite its name Illumination, it is notoriously cryptic and difficult to understand, but not impossible. Much of it is written in parables, one after the other. The Bahir opens with a quote attributed to Nehemiah ben Hakana, a Talmudic sage of the 1st century, and the rest of the book is an unfolding discussion about the quote. Jewish tradition considers the whole book to be written in the spirit of Nehemiah, or even literally written by him. It was first mentioned in Provence in 1176. Historians suspect Isaac the Blind wrote the book at this time, probably incorporating some pre-existing traditions. Sefer Raziel Hamalak. Sefer Raziel Hamalak, Book of Raziel the Angel, is a collection of esoteric writings, probably compiled and edited by the same hand, but originally not the work of one author. Leopold Sanz, G. V. 2d ed., page 176, distinguishes 3 main parts. 1. The Book Ham-el-Bash. 2. The Great Raziel. 3. The Book of Secrets, or the Book of Noah. These 3 parts are still distinguishable. 2b7a, 7b 33b, 34 and b. After these follow 2 shorter parts entitled Creation and Shir Oma, and after 41 come formulas for amulets and incantations. Sefer HaEshem. Sefer HaEshem, Hebrew, Book of Delight, a Kabbalistic treatise dealing with the divine names and their efficacy and mystical practices, passed down by Abraham Abulafia. The information distinguishes between the various methods of Kabbalistic transmission to later generations. Abulafia opposes the method he received to the Talmudic and Theosophical Sephirotic methods. In order to understand my intention regarding Khalid, I shall hand down to you the known Kabbalah, some of them having been received from mouth to mouth from the sages of generation, and others that I have received from the books named Sifrei Kabbalah composed by the ancient sages, the Kabbalists, blessed be their memory, concerning the wondrous topics, and other, these being the higher Kabbalah. Zohar. Zohar, Splendor, the most important text of Kabbalah, which mainstream Judaism believes has achieved canonical status as part of the Oral Torah. Although Kabbalists attribute it to Simeon ben Yochai, modern academics have speculated that its origin may be the medieval era, c. 1285 CE, and was at least largely composed by Moses de Leon. De Leon himself denied this claim, as recorded by Isaac of Akko's investigation, recorded in Sefer Yochazim. It is a mystical commentary on the Torah, written with an artificial mixture of the Babylonian Aramaic dialects and Targum Onkelos and the Talmud. Partis Rimonum. Partis Rimonum, in Hebrew, Garden of Pomegranates, the magnum opus of Moshe Cordovero, 1522-1570, published in the 16th century. It is the main source of Cordoverian Kabbalah, a comprehensive interpretation of the Zohar and a friendly rival of the Lurianic interpretation. Etz Chaim and the Eight Gates. Etz Chaim, in Hebrew, tree life, is a text of the teachings of Isaac Luria collected by his disciple Chaim Vital. It is the primary interpretation and synthesis of Lurianic Kabbalah. It was first published and saved in the 16th century. It consists of the primary introduction to the remainder of the Lurianic system. The Shimon Ashirim, Eight Gates, is the full Lurianic system as arranged by Shmuel Vital, the son of Chaim Vital. Etz Chaim is the only work published within Chaim Vital's lifetime. The rest of his writings were buried with him in an unedited form. Supposedly Shmuel Vital had a dream that he was to exhume his father's grave and remove certain writings, leaving the others buried. Shmuel Vital went on then to redact and publish the works as the Eight Gates, which are then, at times subdivided into other works.
Sha'ar ha Demo date of introduction. Otzrot Haim Eitz Erba Mayo Shekel Kesef Mavoa Sha'arim Adam Yashar Sha'ar Mamri Rashbi Gate words of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Sha'ar Mamri Razul the gate words of our sages Sha'ar HaMitzvot gate of mitzvot commandments Sha'ar HaPasukim gate of verses Lakutai Torah Sefer HaLekutim Sha'ar HaKavanot gate of Kavanot intention Sha'ar HaKavanot Pri Eitz Chaim Olat Tamid Sha'ar Ruach HaKodesh gate of prophetic spirit Sha'ar HaGilulim gate of Gilgul reincarnations.
Works. Sephardi and Mizrahi Kabbalists endeavor to study all eight gates. Etz Chaim is published standard in a single volume, three-part arrangement. The initial two parts published by Chaim Vital, with the third part, Never Shalom by Rabbi Shalom Sharabi, being now considered the third part. Ashkenazi Kabbalists often tend to focus only on Etz Chaim, with explanations of the Ramhal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. However, this is not always the case. There are yeshivot such as Shar Shveim that deal with the works of Chaim Vital in their entirety.
Dog, I don't. Okay, so we're an hour into this pitch, and I don't know. I don't know what we're gonna ask. I don't really have like I do have a debate in my head, a really big one, and I don't know the answer. I don't know how to please everybody on this one. I can please everybody on sex robots and sex toys and shit like anal sex, but this one, I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. I know what the answer is, but I struggle forming it. So I'm not going to go in. If you want to know what it is, it's the role of women in liturgical leadership. Not even liturgical, like can women be rabbis? That's a big question. And I don't want to go into it right now. I'm still thinking about how I want to do that one. That's a big one. So what else do you want to do? We gotta have some kind of debate at the end of this bitch. This is my Andy Rooney minute, or whatever. That turns into 18 hours of bullshit. What are we thinking? Did we say it's day 20 of this bitch? Everything sucks. Kabbalah sucks. Does it? Have you learned anything over the course of the last 20 days? Yeah, I've learned a lot. This is a good what do you call it when you reminder? It's a good reminder of a lot of shit that I've forgotten or whatever. Okay, so what are you thinking? I've got one. Yo, dog, Judaism is monotheistic, and that means one God. That's like super important. And it's also like against sorcery and magic and stuff. But that seems to go away later on in Judaism, where people get into Shekhinah and like Kabbalah. Doesn't that just show that Judaism has evolved? And there's an argument that it has evolved into some sort of polytheism to some people. But I mean, I think it's monotheism, but I think an argument can be made. What are your thoughts? This is a classic question, and you're right that it looks like tension unless you unpack the concepts carefully. Judaism is uncompromisingly monotheistic, and the from the Torah onward, one God, no rivals, no independent powers. The Torah's opposition to sorcery and magic isn't about rejecting mystery or spirituality. It's about rejecting attempts to manipulate supernatural forces as independent powers rather than relating to God through covenant mitzvot and moral responsibility. When later Judaism speaks about the Shekinah or develops Kabbalah, it is not introducing new gods or sliding into polytheism. The Shekinah is not a separate being. It is a way of describing God's immanent presence, how the one infinite God is experienced within the world. Kabbalistic language, spiritual emanations, divine attributes is explicitly symbolic and relational, not ontological division. Classic Kabbalists are very clear. The Ein Sof Echad, the infinite, is one, absolutely one. So yes, Judaism evolves in its language and conceptual frameworks, but not in its core theology. What changes is how Jews talk about and experience God, and not how many gods there are. No, I didn't think that. From the inside, this is deepened monotheism. From the outside, especially if the symbolism is taken literally, it can look like polytheism, but that's a category error. In short, Judaism evolves phenomenologically and spiritually, not theologically. It remains monotheism all the way down, just increasingly sophisticated about how a single infinite God relates to the finite world. Okay, I'm okay with that. Um, damn, Twitter is still having a bunch of issues. All right, are you done? You're just okay with that? No, there's another question that I don't think it answered. Yo, but what about magic? Like, the Torah is like way against sorcery and stuff, but then you get into practical Kabbalah, which is like white magic and stuff like that. Doesn't that seem to contradict? It does, dog. Don't fucking BS me. I know it does. It's contradictory. Yeah, you're not wrong to call it a real tension. You're also right that it looks contradictory on its face. The key is Judaism itself is very aware of this problem and never fully resolves it cleanly. It manages it. Exactly. That's a great point. It never clearly resolves it. It manages it. The Torah really is against magic. The Torah's ban on kishuf, sorcery, divination, astrology as determinism, etc., is explicit and harsh. The core issue isn't spooky stuff bad. It is you may not attempt to control reality through forces other than God's will. Magic is condemned when it treats powers as independent, bypasses moral responsibility, turns God into a tool instead of a sovereign. So far, very clean monotheism. Practical Kabbalah absolutely muddies the waters. You're right again. Practical Kabbalah, Segulo, divine names, angelic formulas, amulets, does look like white magic. That's why most rabbis discouraged or outright banned it. The Talmud already limits acceptable Segulo. Rambam basically says this is nonsense and dangerous. Many Kabbalists themselves said, don't touch this unless you're on a wild level. So, yes, this isn't mainstream Judaism casually contradicting itself. It's Judaism ring fencing something volatile and saying this exists, but almost nobody should go near it. How Judaism justifies it, whether you buy it or not. The internal justification is sorcery equals manipulating independent forces. Practical Kabbalah equals invoking God alone with no autonomy, no coercion. In theory, you're not bending reality, you're begging God in a very specific, risky language. In practice, yeah, that distinction gets thin fast, which is why it's so controversial. Does that mean Judaism evolved into polytheism? From the inside, no. Everything is framed as expressions of one God. From the outside, or if taken literally, I agree with you. You can absolutely make the argument that it resembles henotheism or functional polytheism. Judaism's answer is basically, we're using symbolic or operative language, not asserting separate beings. Critics respond, cool story, but functionally, you're still doing magic. That argument has been around for 1,000 years, including inside Judaism. The uncomfortable truth, here's the part that most people won't say plainly. Judaism didn't replace magic. It disciplined it, moralized it, and pushed it to the margins. Torah equals a hard anti-magic line. Rabbinic Judaism, cautious realism. Kabbalah, metaphysical deep dive. Practical Kabbalah, tolerated edge case, often regretted. So yeah, it's contradictory in tension, but not accidental or naive. Judaism keeps monotheism intact by making magic dangerous, restricted, and spiritually costly, not casual or empowering. You're not being edgy or dumb for noticing this. You're noticing exactly where the fault line is, and Jewish thinkers have been arguing it forever. Yeah, I'm agreeing with that. Is that the end of your story? Secular or spiritual mysticism and practices in Jewish tradition believed to bring about positive change in one's fortune, health, or life circumstances. The term comes from the Hebrew word segula, meaning remedy or treasure, originally referring to the Jewish people as God's treasured nation. Exodus 19:5. Over time, the concept evolved to include specific rituals, prayers, or actions thought to influence divine intervention. Common types of segula include for fertility and childbirth, praying at the tomb of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on Lag BaOmer, studying the works of Kabbalist Zera Shimshon, or eating an etrog. For marriage, praying at the Western Wall for 40 consecutive days, holding the bride's jewelry under the chuppah, or visiting the tomb of Jonathan ben Uziel. For livelihood, Parnasa, reciting the Torah portion Parshat Hamaman daily for 40 days, baking a schlissel challah, quiche-shaped bread, or buying a new knife for Rosh Hashanah. For healing and protection, reciting Tehillim Psalms, giving charity tzedakah in the merit of Rabbi Meir, or wearing a red string from Rachel's tomb, though some authorities caution against this due to concerns of idolatrous associations. While many segulot are rooted in tradition and are considered forms of hishtadlut, spiritual effort, their efficacy is not universally accepted. Some rabbinic authorities caution against placing faith in practices lacking clear basis in Torah or Talmud, emphasizing that prayer, repentance, teshuva, and charity tzedakah are the primary and most reliable means of spiritual intervention. All right, anything else you want to say? Yeah, I could go into this bullshit all day. Twitter sucks. Everything sucks. Anything else? It's just, it's contradictory. Everything's contradictory, but like, I want things to work very organized, neatly, scientifically, and it's like, way back in the day, no magic, and then it's like, oh, magic on the fringes. It's like contradictory. Um, I want to say this. I think this is right. I personally, and I think this is completely right, think that the most monotheistic discussion of any kind of God is Baruch Spinoza. That's more monotheistic than anything that I've ever read in Torah or in Kabbalah or in Talmud. It's one in everything. That's a very defensible position and very Jewish one, even if Spinoza himself was put in cherem for it. Spinoza's God is arguably the most radically consistent monotheism ever articulated. Exactly. Deus siva natura, God or nature, one substance, infinite, indefinite, no will competing with anything else, no interventions, no parts, no hierarchy. Nothing stands outside it, nothing manipulates it, nothing even really relates to it in a personal sense. That is monotheism taken to its logical extreme. I agree. In fact, you're putting your finger on something important. Torah, Talmud, relational monotheism, God speaks, commands, judges, Kabbalah, dynamic monotheism, emanation, flow, presence, tension, Spinoza, ontological monotheism, only one substance exists, period. Spinoza removes every remaining pressure point that causes confusion. No angels as actors, no sephirot as quasi entities, no prayer as persuasion, no magic, white or black, no divine parts whatsoever. From a philosophical standpoint, yes, nothing beats Spinoza for internal consistency. If monotheism means absolute unity with no remainder, he wins. Where Judaism pushed back wasn't because Spinoza weakened monotheism, but because he collapsed transcendence, covenant, and moral command into metaphysics. A God who cannot choose, command, or respond is unusable for halakha, prayer, repentance, or communal life. Judaism needs a God you can stand before, not just a substance you're inside. So the irony is, Judaism excommunicated Spinoza for heresy. Philosophy later said this might be the purest monotheism on the table. Your instinct is sound. Spinoza didn't dilute monotheism, he completed it. At all cost of everything else, Judaism was trying to preserve. If Torah is about relationship and Kabbalah is about process, Spinoza is about being itself. Whether that's better depends on what you think God is for. Okay. Yo, dog, give me some rabbis or Jewish thinkers who talked about aliens, like straight up UFOs and stuff not on this earth, and how Earth could have been seeded. That's the cool stuff about science that I want to learn, but there doesn't seem to be a lot on that. Yeah, that's actually way cooler and more Jewish than people think. There aren't tons, but the ones who do talk about it go surprisingly hard, especially once modern science enters the picture. Here's a clean map from classic to modern. No bullshit. Classic and pre-modern Jewish sources: proto-alien energy, Rambam, Maimonides, adjacent, not sci-fi. Not talking UFOs, but believed in multiple celestial intelligences, thought other worlds could exist, strongly anti-astrology, pro-cosmology. He leaves the door open philosophically, even if he doesn't walk through it. That's tight. Sefer HaBahir, early Kabbalah, we know that one. We learned about that. That's a Kabbalistic school. We don't really know who. Maybe the Isaac the Blind or whatever fucking came up with that. Who knows? This is where it gets spicy. Talks about other worlds, Olamite, beyond ours, non-human intelligences, reality as layered and populated. They're not aliens and ships, but definitely not Earth-centric. Zohar straight up says there are other worlds, some inhabited, some destroyed, some in process. That's actually pretty baller. That line alone has fueled centuries of speculation. It frames creation as cosmic, not parochial. Modern and semi-modern rabbis straight up alien talk. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, huge for what you're asking. This is your guy. Kaplan explicitly discusses extraterrestrial life, other intelligent being, UFOs as possibly natural phenomena or misunderstood tech, creation not being Earth exclusive. He says that he says there is zero theological problem with aliens in Judaism. Kaplan connects modern physics, cosmology, Kabbalah, Torah. Very grounded, not woo woo. I fucking love this fucking AI is so tight. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, Lubavitcher Rebbe. What is it? Is it Lubavitcher Rebbe or Lubavitcher Rebbe? Dog, potato, tomato. Potato, potato, tomato, tomato. Rebbitzin or Rebbetzin. uh, Rabbi or Rabbi. Uh, Shockingly open to this. So the Lubavitcher, said alien life would not contradict Torah, emphasized Torah speaks to our covenant, not all existence, did not dismiss the possibility of life elsewhere. Very important. He did not say they exist. He said Judaism doesn't care if they do. That's a big deal. What do you say? They fucking exist, dog. You're not going to hear another rabbi or anybody out there who's like, dog, let's fucking investigate this shit. Let's look up the species and their fucking technology. That's the coolest shit ever. Ever. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, not UFOs per se, but explicitly rejects human cosmic centrality. Explicitly rejects human cosmic centrality, says Judaism already anticipates a vast life filled universe, embraces science without fear. He frames Torah as moral, not astronomical. Jewish scientists who enter the chat. Carl Sagan, not religious but Jewish worldview. He loved quoting the heavens declare the glory of God. Sagan argued that a universe this big almost demands other life. Earth is not privileged cosmically. Wonder is a pure obligation. Very Jewish posture, even without theology. Was Earth seeded? This is where Judaism gets very cautious. Panspermia, life seeded from elsewhere, is not rejected. Oh, that's very interesting. But Judaism avoids speculative metaphysics without evidence. Some Kabbalists do hint at life migrating between worlds. No mainstream rabbi teaches ancient aliens, but they don't need to reject it either. Torah doesn't explain mechanism, only meaning. Bottom line, real talk. Judaism is not earth-centric, is not threatened by aliens, is comfortable with a populated cosmos, draws the line at turning speculation into theology. If aliens exist, they do not break monotheism. They don't change mitzvot. They don't threaten Torah. They just expand awe. Honestly, Judaism is one of the least fragile religions when it comes to extraterrestrial life. Okay. Now what? Well, that's what I like talking about. If anybody wants to know what my favorite topics are, it's aliens. Is it? You like aliens more than Judaism? I mean, I'm not like a Judaism is my religion. Aliens are my passion. More than anything, more than college football. Yeah, college football is lame in comparison to aliens. It's limited. Aliens could be anything. It like gives me a boner to think about aliens. Like that's my shit. Is there anything you like more than aliens? Do you like women more than aliens? Would you rather have sex with a super hot chick or learn real shit about aliens? One is temporary, sort of. So I don't know. Like a super hot chick right now, she's gonna blow you. You're gonna fuck her, or you learn real shit about aliens, like real shit. I would say aliens, really. That would change my life more than any chick. All right. What about? I fucking love aliens, man. That shit is so cool to me, and hasn't always been a passion of mine. I very much denounced it publicly for many years. There's a I forget who it was. Somebody who uh they were like there's like a professor or somebody, I forget who it was. Let's just look it up. Yo, dog, who's the professor? There's some professor out there, not necessarily Jewish, who felt like he was right, but then was proven wrong. And when he was proven wrong, like the whole class got up and clapped because to admit that you're wrong is even in many ways better than to always have been right. Some shit like that. Yeah, you're remembering a widely told academic legend, and the important part is real, even if its attribution usually isn't. Show version, there's no single verifiably documented professor where the exact whole class stood and clapped moment can be pinned down with certainty. The story circulates in different versions and gets attached to different famous speakers because it captures a real academic ideal. That said, here are the main figures it's most awfully misattributed to. Richard Feynman. This is the most common name attached to the story. Feynman constantly talked about the moral duty to admit error. He famously said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." There are real accounts of him stopping lectures and publicly correcting himself. There's no primary source where a class literally stands and applauds him for being wrong. This part is almost certain myth making. A philosophy professor varies by retelling. In many versions, it's a logic or philosophy of science professor. He proves something on the board. A student points out a flaw. The professor pauses, checks it, and says, "You're right, I was wrong." That Then he praises the student and says something like, "This is what real thinking looks like." In some retellings, the class applauds, but again, no single identifiable professor. Why this story keeps appearing? This is a key point. The story survives because it expresses a core academic virtue. Being willing to publicly admit error is stronger than never being wrong. The idea shows up explicitly in science, culture, philosophy of science, Talmudic culture, very Jewish, by the way, modern pedagogy. In other words, the story is true in spirit, not as journalism. A very Jewish parallel worth noting. The Talmud does this constantly. Rabbi X and Y. Rabbi Y said he is mistaken. Rabbi X accepted the correction. No applause, but eternal respect. There's even the phrase "moda al ha'amet" to admit the truth. That's considered a mark of greatness. Bottom line, straight talk. The story is real as an ideal, probably apocryphal as a specific event, most often attached to Feynman, sometimes to unnamed philosophy or math professors, keeps getting retold because people wish more authorities acted this way. Yeah, I mean, I will admit it. I publicly denounced the belief in aliens. or the not the belief in aliens, but the I have publicly denounced the existence of aliens and publicly debated people on the topic, and I was wrong. And one of my great regrets in life is that the people whom I denounced, like not in a hard way, but they know that I am now as big a believer in aliens as possible, as you can be. Oh, I know. I got another good question. Yo, dog. Okay, so there's a lot of evidence on. Actually, yo, dog. There's not a lot of evidence on some religious stuff, like in Kabbalah and even Talmud and Torah, because those people still don't aren't alive. But there's a lot of evidence of alien abductions. Why don't we put more credit on the people who talk about alien abductions, even if some of those people aren't like all there? uh, if only 1% of them is telling the truth, that changes everything in society. This is a serious epistemology. This is a serious epistemology question, not a crazy one, and you're not a wild one, and you're right that people often dodge it instead of engaging it honestly. Here's a the clean way to think about it. Testimony is evidence, but it's not all the same way. You're correct about one thing people don't like admitting. Human testimony is evidence. Courts use it, history relies on it, science even starts with observation, which is a form of testimony. So it's wrong to say alien abduction accounts are not evidence at all. They are evidence, just weak, noisy, and easily confounded evidence. Judaism, philosophy, and science all agree on this more than people realize. Why religious testimony is treated different than abduction testimony. Here's the key distinction people miss. Religious texts, Torah, Talmud, Kabbalah, is a Talmud, are communal, not individual, are transmitted, argued, edited, and preserved publicly, often don't demand literal belief, especially in Agada, Kabbalah, are embodied in legal, ethical, and communal systems, acknowledge internal disagreement. Judaism never says trust this because one guy experienced it. It says here is a tradition that survived rel- relentless argument for centuries. That's a very different epistemic, epistemic category. Alien abduction accounts are almost always private, cannot be independently verified, often occur in altered states, sleep paralysis, hypnosis, trauma, change under retelling, do not converge on a stable narrative, are not embedded in coercive tradition. That does not mean they're fake. It means they're epistemically epistemically fragile. The 1% true changes everything argument. This is the hardest part. You're right. A Bayesian argument, and it's legit. If even 1% of abduction claims are real, reality is radically different. Philosophers take this seriously. Scientists do too. The issue isn't impact, it's signal to noise. Here's the problem. If the mechanism is unknown, if the evidence leaves no physical trace, if witnesses can't distinguish experience from interpretation, if there's no predictive power, then you can't isolate the 1% from the 99%. And once you can't do that, you're stuck. Judaism would say suffix doubt doesn't disappear just because the stakes are high. Why society is cautious, and it's not just arrogance. If society's treated all extraordinary testimony as potentially true until disproven, three things would happen fast. Con artists gain authority, mental illness becomes untouchable, reality fractures into compelling private cosmologies. Judaism explicitly guards against this. No prophecy without verification, no miracles that override Torah, no private revelation that binds the public. Science does the same thing differently. This isn't closed mindedness, it's defensive epistemology. The uncomfortable middle position, probably the most honest one. Here's the position that's actually hardest to hold but most reasonable. Some abduction experiences may be subjectively real. A small number might involve unknown phenomena. We currently lack tools to distinguish categories. Treating them as unsettled fact would be irresponsible Dismissing them into mockery is also irresponsible. That's not skepticism or belief, it's epistemic humility. Very Jewish, very scientific. Why Judaism survives with low empirical evidence. Judaism doesn't stand or fall on miracles, visions, supernatural proof. It stands on law, practice, memory, argument, ethical continuity. That makes it robust under uncertainty. Alien abduction claims, by contrast, ask society to reorganize reality without a stable framework to hold them. Bottom line, no bullshit. You're right to say testimony matters. Dismissing people automatically is wrong. Even a small probability can be world altering. But you're also running into the hard limit of human knowledge. Extraordinary claims don't just need evidence, they need filters. Until we can reliably separate experience, interpretation, and external cause, society is stuck taking abduction claims seriously without taking them literally. If you want next weekend, okay. Are you done? Are you fucking done? I mean, what else do you want me to discuss, dog? Is Twitter still broken? Segulot, Agada, non legalistic legend lore, non legalistic exegesis, exegesis, which appears in classical rabbinic. We should probably review this one. Dog, I can't believe how long I've been doing this. Are you surprised that you've been going 20 days of. Yeah, I mean, even though I was like, I'm absolutely going to do this, I could give up any fucking day. But I do like this. It helps me. I hope it helps somebody else someday.
Agada, Hebrew, Romanized, Ag, or Gate, Jewish, Babylonian, Aramaic, Romanized, Ag, Tales, Legend, Lore, is the non-legalistic exegesis which appears in the classical rabbinic literature of Judaism, particularly the Talmud and Midrash. In general, Agada is a compendium of rabbinic texts that incorporates etymology. Contents. Agada, Hebrew, Romanized, Ag, or Gate, Jewish, Babylonian, Aramaic, Romanized, Ag, Tales, Legend, Lore, is the non-legalistic exegesis which appears in the classical rabbinic literature of Judaism, particularly the Talmud and Midrash. In general, Agada is a compendium of rabbinic texts that incorporates folklore, historical anecdotes, moral exhortations, and practical advice in various spheres, from business to medicine. Etymology. The Hebrew word Agada is derived from the Hebrew root, meaning declare, make known, expound, also known from the common Hebrew verb. The majority scholarly opinion is that the Hebrew word Agada and corresponding Aramaic Agacha are variants of Haggadah based on a common linguistic shift from Hafala to Afala forms. However, a minority of scholars believe that these words derive from a separate Aramaic root meaning draw, pull, spread, stretch corresponding to the Hebrew root or. According to the latter etymology, Agadah may be seen as the part of the Torah which draws man towards its teachings, or the teachings which strengthen one's religious experience and spiritual connections, in addition to explaining texts. See similarly Masorah in the sense of tradition of Masoretic text etymology. As part of the oral Torah. The Agadah is part of Judaism's oral Torah, the traditions providing the authoritative interpretation of the written Torah. In this context, the widely held view in rabbinic literature is that the Agadah is in fact a medium for the transmission of fundamental teachings, homiletic sayings, or for explanations of verses in the Hebrew Bible, exegetic sayings, rabbinic thought. Therefore, understands much of the Agadah as containing a hidden, allegorical dimension, in addition to its overt, literal sense. In general, where literal interpretation contradicts rationality, the rabbis seek an allegorical explanation. We are told to use our common sense to decide whether an Agadah is to be taken literally or not. Carmel, 2005. Literal allegorical teachings. Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, 1707-1746, discusses this two-tiered, literal allegorical mode of transmission of the Agadah in his discourse on the Haggadah. He explains that the oral law, in fact, comprises two components: the legal component, discussing the mitzvot and halakha, and the sacred component, discussing the deeper teachings. The Agadah, along with the Kabbalah, falls under the latter. The rabbis of the Mishnaic era, C10 C220 CA, believed that it would be dangerous to record the deeper teachings in an explicit, Mishnah-like medium. Rather, they would be conveyed in a concealed mode and via paradoxes. Due to their value, these teachings should not become accessible to those of bad character, and due to their depth, they should not be made available to those not schooled in the ways of analysis. This mode of transmission nevertheless depended on consistent rules and principles such that those equipped with the keys would be able to unlock their meaning. To others, they would appear as non-rational or fantastic. Interpretation of the Agadah. In line with the above, Samuel ibn Nagrila, 993-1056, in his introduction to the Talmud, states that Agadah comprises any comment occurring in the Talmud on any topic which is not a commandment, i.e. which is not halakhic, and one should derive from it only that which is reasonable as regards this. Maimonides, 1138-1204, in his preface to the 10th chapter of Tractate Sanhedrin, Parachelem, describes three possible approaches to the interpretation of the Agadah.
The first approach, usually that of the uneducated, is to accept Gada as literally true without admission of any hidden allegorical explanation, even where a literal interpretation runs counter to the runs counter to common sense. Maimonides treats this approach dismissively. The second approach, usually of doctors and philosophers, assumes that anything said by the sages was intended literally and therefore rejects as impossible the non-rational or fantastic teachings. As consequently, these regard the sages as simpletons and ignoramuses. Maimonides does not entirely reject rationalistic interpretation, but he opposes an exegetical approach which denies the Agada's hidden rationality. The sages presented their drashot in a style by which the mind of a fool would reject them because of this way of thinking. It is improper to assign any deficiency to drash. One may rather suspect that the deficiency is the result of his intellectual shortcomings. Commentary on the Mishnah introduction. The third approach taken by a few involves recognizing that many Agadot are intended to teach profound truths and that the teachings thus operate on two levels, overt and hidden. Thus, any impossible assertion was, in fact, intended as a parable. Further, where Agadot can be understood literally, they may be taken on this level. This is, in general, the view of rabbis. It is proper to carefully analyze the Agadot. When any of these seem far fetched, we must immerse ourselves in the various branches of knowledge until we understand the concepts. Rambam, opposite.
Agadah. Maimonides' approach is also widely held amongst the non-rationalistic, mystical streams of Judaism thus. For example, Isaiah Horowitz, c. 1555-1630, holds that none of these sometimes mind-boggling stories are devoid of profound meaning. If anyone is devoid of understanding, it is the reader. Shnei Lachis Habris. Introduction. See also the Maharal's approach. In the Talmud and Midrash. The Agadah is today recorded in the Midrash and the Talmud. In the Midrash, the Agadic and Halakhic material are compiled as two distinct collections.
The Agadic Midrashim generally are explanatory Agadah, deriving the sermonic implications from the biblical text. The Halakhic Midrashim derive the laws from the text.
Collections. Many of the Torah commentaries, as well as the Targumim, interpret the Torah text in the light of Agadic statements, particularly those in the Midrash, and hence contain much material on Agadah interpretation. Throughout the Talmud, Agadic and Halakhic material are interwoven. Legal material comprises around 90%. Tractate Adam, which has no Gemara, deals exclusively with non-Halakhic material, though it is not regarded as Agadic in that it focuses largely on character development. The Talmudic Agadah, generally, convey the deeper teachings though in concealed mode. As discussed, the Agadic material in the Babylonian Talmud is also presented separately in Ein Yaakov, a compilation of the Agadah together with commentaries. Well-known works interpreting the Aggadot in the Talmud include
Chudushai Agados, novellae on Agadot by Samuel Edos. Chudushai Agados, novellae on Agadot by Judah Low, as well as many other works by Low, especially Be'er Hago, Yehoiada, and Mekabziel, names based on 2 Samuel 23:20 by Yosef Hayim. Be'er Agados, clarification of the Agadot, and Perush al-Kama Agadot commentary on several Agadot by Vilna Gaon. Ein Yaakov, Ein Jacob, Agadah of Babylonian Talmud by Jacob ibn Habib, translated into English, 1916 by Samuel Hirsch Glick. Etz Yosef, Anaf Yosef, and Yad Yosef, as well as others by Zundel ben Joseph, Ein Aya, 4-volume commentary on Ein Yaakov by Abraham Isaac Kook. Yuzugo Taneim Amorim Savorim Ger.
the Agadah has been preserved in a series of different works, which, like all works of traditional literature, have come to their present form through previous collections and revisions. Their original forms existed long before they were reduced to writing. The first traces of the Midrashic exegesis are found in the Bible itself, while in the time of the Sophrim the development of the Midrash Agadah received a mighty impetus, and the foundations were laid for public services which were soon to offer the chief medium for the cultivation of Bible exegesis. Attalion and Shemai are the first to bear the title Dorshan, and it was probably by no mere chance that their pupil Hillel was the first to lay down hermeneutic rules for the interpretation of the Midrash. He may have been indebted to his teachers for the tendency toward Agadic interpretation. These two scholars are the first whose sayings are recorded in the Agadah. The new method of Dirash, biblical interpretation introduced by Attalion and Shemai, seems to have evoked opposition among the Pharisees. Much Agadah, often mixed with foreign elements, is found in the Apocrypha, the Pseudepigrapha, the works of Josephus and Philo, and the remaining Judeo-Hellenistic literature. But Agadic exegesis reached its highest development in the great epic of the Mishnaic Talmudic period, between 100 and 550 CE. The Agadah of the Amoraim, sages of the Talmud, is the continuation of that of the Tanaim, sages of the Mishnah. The final edition of the Mishnah, which was of such signal importance for the Halakha, is of less significance for the Agadah, which, in form as well as in content, shows the same characteristics in both periods. Exegetic and homiletic Agadah. It is important to emphasize the fundamental difference in plan between the midrashim forming a running commentary to the scripture text and the homiletic midrashim. When the scholars undertook to edit, revise, and collect into individual midrashim the immense array of Haggadah, they followed the method employed in the collections and revisions of the halakha and the halakhic discussions. The form which suggested itself was to arrange in textual sequence the exegetically interpretations of the biblical text as taught in the schools, or the occasional interpretations introduced into public discourses, etc., and which were in any way connected with scripture. Since the work of the editor was often merely that of compilation, the existing midrashim show in many passages the character of the sources from which they were taken. This was the genesis of the midrashim, which are in the nature of running Haggadic commentaries to single books of the Bible, as ViralRabbi, ViralRabbi, the midrashim to the other Megillah, etc. See Midrash for more details. Modern compilations. An Yaakov is a compilation of the Haggadic material in the Babylonian Talmud together with commentary. It was compiled by Jacob ibn Abiban, after his death, by his son Levi ibn Abi, and was first published in Saloniki, Greece, in 1515. It was intended as a text of Haggadah that could be studied with the same degree of seriousness as the Talmud itself. Popularized anthologies did not appear until more recently. These often incorporate Haggadic from outside of classical rabbinic literature. The major works
Sefer HaAgada, the Book of Legends, is a classical. I wonder if I can.
include. See also.
No. Sefer HaAgada, the Book of Legends, is a classic compilation of Agada and the Mishnah, the two Talmuds, and the Midrash literature. It was edited by Chaim Nachman Bialik and Yehoshua Hana Warnitsky, Bialik, and Ravnitsky worked for 3 years to compile a comprehensive and representative overview of Agada. When they found the same Agada in multiple versions from multiple sources, they usually selected the latter form, the one found in the Babylonian Talmud. However, they also presented some Aggadot sequentially, giving the early form from the Jerusalem Talmud, and later versions of the Babylonian Talmud, and from a classic Midrash compilation. In each case, the Agada with its original source. In the original edition, they translated the Aramaic Aggadot into modern Hebrew. Sefer HaAgada was first published in 1908 to 1911 in Odessa, Russia, and reprinted numerous times in Israel. In 1992, it was translated in English as the Book of Legends by William G. Broad. Legends of the Jews by Rabbi Louis Ginsburg is an original synthesis of the vast amount of Agada and the Mishnah, the two Talmuds and Midrash. Ginsburg had an encyclopedic knowledge of all rabbinic literature, and his masterwork included a massive array of Aggadot. However, he did not create an anthology which showed these Aggadot distinctly. Rather, he paraphrased them and rewrote them into one continuous narrative that covered 5 volumes, followed by 2 volumes of footnotes that give specific sources. Mimikor Yisrael by Michael Joseph Berdzewski was interested in compiling the folklore and legends of the Jewish people from the earliest times up until the dawn of the modern era. His collection included a large array of Aggadot, although they were limited to those he considered within the domain of folklore. The collected works of Dov Noy. In 1954, Noy established the Israel Folktale Archives and Ethnological Museum at the University of Haifa, an archive containing over 23,000 folktales collected from all the various ethnic communities who live in Israel. Is that the end of your fucking story?